A man in his early 30s still lives with his mum and quietly believes Santa never stopped visiting their little yellow house. One Christmas Eve he discovers Santa is very real, very human, and unexpectedly interested in his mother. Settle in for a calm, sarcastic bedtime drama about growing up late, cracked traditions, and the Christmas that finally refuses to stay frozen in time. Chapter 1. The Man Who Never Moved Out. The morning light over the small town outside Oslo tried its best to look magical, but the sky mostly managed a kind of tired grey. Snow lay in soft piles along the sidewalks, slumped against hedges and fences like it had given it on being part of a postcard. Inside a modest yellow house on a quiet street, Christmas had already decided that subtlety was overrated. Lights framed the living room windows. A scented candle insisted on smelling like cinnamon and something vaguely artificial. On the stereo in the corner, a playlist of classic holiday songs shuffled between decades, stuck in an endless loop that had probably been created sometime during the late teenage years of one specific man. That man shuffled into the kitchen wearing a faded red sweater with a reindeer that had lost some of its printed glitter. His name was Martin, and he was in his early 30s, though his morning hair argued for at least 40. He scratched the side of his head, blinked at the coffee machine, and pressed the same familiar buttons with the air of someone starting up an old ritual rather than just making breakfast. Martin lived with his mother. This was not a temporary solution or a dramatic down-on-his-luck story. It was simply how life had continued to be. He had left for a while once, for a shared apartment filled with empty pizza boxes and bad Wi-Fi, then come back after deciding he preferred working at the electronics store and sleeping in his old room to arguing about dishes at 2 a.m. The kettle hissed. The coffee dripped. Martin lined up his mug with scientific precision, half watching a news anchor on the small kitchen television gesture at a map dotted with snowflakes. The volume was low, as if the world outside was something best observed at a distance. His mother, Elizabeth, walked in as if the house itself brightened a little to greet her. She was in her mid to late 40s, dressed in a simple black top and jeans that somehow looked more stylish than the average office outfit. Her hair was pinned up in a loose twist, and her eyeliner was the sort that suggested she had either excellent technique or years of practice hiding tired mornings. She glanced around the kitchen, then at Martin. "You started the playlist already," she said. Martin nodded, lifting his mug. "Tradition," he replied. "Last week before Christmas. It has to be on from breakfast till bedtime. That is how it feels like a proper December day." Elizabeth reached past him for a glass and poured some orange juice with the casual grace of someone who had been navigating this kitchen and this man for a very long time. "You know most people listen to different playlists sometimes," she said with a small smile. "Variety exists." He shrugged. "They can live dangerously. I like these songs." The narrator, if anyone had cared to listen, might have suggested that Martin liked the way these songs made the house feel like it had when he was small and the world had seemed to stop in awe of Christmas. But no one asked the narrator, so Martin simply stirred his coffee. Outside, the houses across the street showed their own holiday personalities. One neighbour had chosen tasteful white lights. Another had gone for the blinking riot of colour that could probably be seen from low-flying planes. The small supermarket down the road had set up a temporary stand of gingerbread hearts and pre-wrapped chocolates, ready for last-minute panic gifting. Martin watched the news for a moment, then turned the television off, replacing the world with the softer noise of the playlist in the living room. He preferred it that way, especially in December. The world was loud enough. After breakfast, he would go to work at the electronics store on the edge of town, where people would appear in a state of mild panic, asking him to explain the difference between one cable and another, or begging for last units of game consoles that had sold out several days ago. He would smile in the calm, slightly absent way of a man whose real life started only when he locked the shop door and went home to his mother's house, to the glow of the tree and the smell of dinner. For now, he buttered his toast with care. It was important that the day started right. Elizabeth leaned against the counter with her juice. She watched him for a long moment, taking in the familiar way he moved, the comfortable slump of his shoulders, the permanent presence of that reindeer sweater once temperatures dipped below a certain point. "You know," she said, "we could try something different this year." He looked up, suspicious. "Different how?" She pretended to think deeply. "Maybe fewer decorations. Or maybe we skip the old Santa figurines with the chipped noses and the slightly terrifying eyes. I think they have survived enough winters." He shook his head with solemn conviction. "Those are non-negotiable. You know the rules." "Ah, yes," she replied. "The rules. Of course." The house indeed had rules, though none were written down. The same string of paper stars had to be taped to the same shelf. The little ceramic village with the crooked church went on the windowsill in the living room. The fake snow blanket, which had seen better days some years ago, was carefully arranged beneath the tree. Most of these rules had originally been hers. Somewhere along the way they had become his. As Martin finished his coffee and grabbed his jacket, he glanced at the calendar pinned to the wall. Only a few days to go. The date was a reminder and a promise. "Christmas Eve soon," he said quietly. Elizabeth followed his gaze. "Yes," she said, "Christmas Eve soon." There was a small pause, the kind that held more memories than words. Then he smiled, a little shy, a little bright. "You will be home early that day, right?" "Of course," she replied. "Someone has to make sure the cookies for Santa turn out well." He nodded, satisfied, as if this were a sensible piece of adult planning rather than something that should have faded out of his life decades ago. He zipped up his jacket, slipped his feet into his boots, and went out into the grey winter morning, leaving behind the warm kitchen, his mother, and the faint smell of coffee. The door clicked shut behind him, but the echo of his childlike excitement stayed. Elizabeth moved slowly into the living room once he had gone. The tree stood in the corner, dressed in gold and red. She had added a few modern ornaments over the years, trying to gently update things, but the old handmade decorations still dominated. Paper chains from when Martin was in primary school, carefully stored each year. A lopsided angel he had insisted on making with more glitter than structure. She touched at the ornaments, a small glass heart that had been a gift from her own mother. The heart swung gently, catching the light. "Santa," she muttered under her breath, almost amused, almost exhausted. It had started as a way to protect him. It had worked so well that now she was not sure how to stop. Back in the hallway she found Martin's scarf hanging on the hook, forgotten again. She picked it up and smiled to herself. Some boys leave their childhood behind and their laundry at the gym. Martin left his scarf on the hook, and his belief in Santa on the coffee table, neatly folded between the cookies and the candles. She placed the scarf back where he would see it when he returned, then went to gather her own things for the day. At the office, people would talk about travel plans, partners, children visiting from university. She would talk about her son at home, with that practiced balance of pride and defensive humour. "Yes, he still lives with me," she would say with a shrug. "Someone has to keep the Christmas playlist running." On the way to work, she walked through the centre of town, passing the familiar shops. There was the bakery with the gingerbread in the window, the florist who added red ribbons to everything in December, just in case someone forgot what month it was. A clothing store displaying a mannequin in a sequined dress that looked ready for a party she had not been invited to. Elizabeth breathed in the cold air and watched her breath form little clouds. She liked this time of year, even when it hurt a bit. The lights made the dark less heavy. The shared rituals made loneliness easier to camouflage. Back at the house in the evening, Martin returned with a plastic bag of groceries in one hand and a wrapped box in the other. He kept the box mostly behind his back, as if there were spies in the hallway. "What is that?" Elizabeth asked in a lightly curious tone. He hesitated, then held the box up for half a second. "Presents. For someone, maybe." She raised an eyebrow. "For Santa, perhaps." He snorted, almost convincing. "Very funny. Santa does not need presents. He has a factoring." "Right," she said, smiling as she took some of the groceries from him. "Of course. Silly me." They cooked dinner together, a dance of practiced movements. He chopped vegetables, she stirred something on the stove. They talked about customers at his store, about her colleagues, about the weather. Nothing dramatic, nothing new, the kind of quiet domestic life that can look both boring and safe depending on who is watching. When they sat down to eat, the tree lights glowed in the corner. From the stereo came yet another familiar song about snow and bells. Martin glanced at the window, where a thin layer of frost had begun to form along the edges. "You remember when I was little and we left the window open a bit so Santa could get in without waking me," he said. She nodded. "I remember almost freezing my toes off in the morning because of that." He grinned. "Worth it." The grin faded into something softer. "You think he will come this year," he added, tone light, almost joking, but with that echo underneath. Elizabeth set down her fork and studied him. She saw the grown man he was supposed to be, with his overgrown hair and his work-tired hands. She also saw, as she always did, the little boy who had clung to a red-clad stranger in their living room winter the year everything had fallen apart. "Of course he will," she said gently. "He always does." Martin nodded, as if this settled something important. He returned to his food with renewed appetite. It was an odd belief he carried, not quite the simple childhood faith in a man with a sleigh and flying reindeer. It had grown twisted and complicated over time. He knew that Santa, as officially described in books and songs, did not fit well into adult life. Yet somehow, in the corner of his mind where he stored certain hopes, he maintained the idea that someone kind and mysterious always managed to show up on Christmas Eve. Some mix of neighbour in a costume, mother with hidden gifts, and something else he refused to define too closely. He had never fully examined the belief, because examining it might break it. So he wrapped it in routine instead. Cookies, lights, gifts that appeared without his knowledge of the receipt. Year after year. After dinner, he walked into the living room and straightened a few ornaments on the tree, as if such adjustments could straighten his life along with the branches. Elizabeth watched from the doorway. A small smile caught somewhere between indulgence and worry. She knew very well that the world would not wait forever for him to grow out, to move out, to form a life that did not revolve around her kitchen and their joint holiday rituals. She also knew that some part of her had helped keep him here, because it was easier to care for a son who needed her than to sit in a quiet house alone. The narrator, again uninvited, might have pointed out that they were both hiding in the same snow globe, only from slightly different fears. As the evening wound down, Martin checked the time and announced that he had to sleep early. "Busy days before Christmas," he said, stretching. "People get very desperate about headphones." Elizabeth laughed softly. "Good night then," she said. He paused at the doorway to the hall. "Mum, yes. Thank you for keeping Christmas the way we do." She swallowed once, then smiled. "Someone has to make sure Santa does not get lost," she said. He nodded, satisfied with that answer, and disappeared down the hallway to his room where a tangle of old posters and newer gadgets formed the landscape of his life. In the quiet that followed, Elizabeth turned off the main lights, leaving only the tree glowing in the corner. She sat on the sofa for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of the house, feeling the weight of the years in her shoulders and the familiar ache of loving someone who refused to step fully into the world. He believes more than he admits, she thought. Maybe I do too. Outside, snow began to fall in small, patient flakes, dusting the street and the cars and the old yellow house, where a man in his 30s still believed in Santa, and a mother in her 40s still was not sure how to stop him. Chapter 2. How Christmas Froze in Time. Long before the faded reindeer sweater and the well-worn playlist, there had been a different winter. The house was newer then, its walls sharper, its paint less tired. The decorations were fewer but more carefully chosen. The years had not yet layered themselves into the corners. Martin remembered that winter in scattered fragments, the way the air had felt heavy in the hallway, the muted arguments behind closed doors, the way his father had paced back and forth, keys in hand, the sound of metal tapping against his palm like a nervous little bell. He had been a boy then, small enough that the kitchen table seemed taller, old enough to sense that something important was breaking. In the weeks leading up to that particular Christmas, the house had not smelled like baking. It had smelled like stress. Bills stacked on the counter, voices lowered in the next room, a tension that made laughter rare and brittle when it came. One evening, Martin had sat on the living room floor with a box of ornaments at his side. The tree stood bare, its branches reaching into the room like cautious hands. He held a tiny wooden soldier in his palm, turning it over, waiting for someone to tell him where it should go. His father walked past the doorway, jacket on, shoes in hand. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed. He had the look of a man who wanted to be somewhere else but had not yet admitted it out loud. "Are we going to decorate the tree?" Martin had asked, trying to make his voice sound casual. His father had stopped, looked at him for a long moment, then at the undecorated branches. Later he had said, voice flat, "I need to go out." "Where?" Martin had asked. His father had hesitated, then shrugged. "Just out." That was the last full conversation they had about anything that mattered. He left that night and simply did not come back in the way fathers are supposed to. There were messages at first, explanations about needing time, about things being complicated. Then fewer messages, then nothing. The space at the kitchen table stayed empty, and the house adjusted itself around that emptiness as if it had always been there. Elizabeth had not cried in front of her son, at least not that he saw. She moved through those days with a kind of determined stillness, as if she were walking across thin ice and could not afford to look down. On a cold afternoon not long after he left, she came home carrying several bags from the discount store in town. Martin watched her unpack them at the kitchen counter. Flour, sugar, cinnamon, raisins, a bag of oranges, a small pack of cheap red candles. "Are we having guests?" he asked. "We are having Christmas," she answered, with a firmness that sounded almost like a challenge. From that moment she began to reconstruct the holiday like a set piece. She baked until the whole house smelled like ginger and butter. She cut paper stars during the late hours, when she thought he was asleep. She hummed along to the radio even when her eyes looked puffy in the morning. What Martin did not know was that she was rehearsing something else as well. In front of the bathroom mirror, late at night, Elizabeth practiced a Santa laugh. It came out awkward and brittle at first, then deeper, more convincing. She put on an old red scarf around her shoulders to see if the colour suited her for what she had in mind. She quickly realised she could not play both Santa and Mother without leaving too many gaps in the illusion. She would need help. The neighbour down the street, an older man with a kind face and an impressive white beard, was the obvious choice. His name was Harry, and he had retired from the postal service with a modest pension and a fondness for crossword puzzles. Elizabeth had gone to his door at icy evening, heart racing, feeling foolish. When he opened, she explained in a rushed, practical tone that she needed a favour for her son. "You want me to be Santa?" he had said, eyes crinkling. "If you do not mind," she replied, "just for a short visit. Just so he does not feel that everything has disappeared at once." Harry had nodded slowly. "I can do that," he said. "I have the beard already. The rest cannot be that hard." They worked out details. What time he would arrive. Where she would leave the costume she had borrowed from a community theatre. What gift he should bring from the sack. How to make his voice sound like someone who had seen every chimney in town. Christmas Eve came. That night the house glowed with more determination than luxury. The tree was decorated with a mixture of old ornaments and new ones from the discount store. The table held a modest spread of food that smelled better than it cost. Candles flickered on the windowsill, sending small messages of warmth into the cold neighbourhood. Martin sat on the living room rug in pyjamas printed with snowmen, fidgeting with a toy car. He kept glancing at the clock, then at the window, then at his mother. "You said he might come," he reminded her. "I said he might," she answered. "Santa is very busy." She said the words lightly, but inside she was counting minutes with the precision of a military operation. The costume was hanging in Harry's hallway. The small wrapped gift, paid for in careful increments, was ready. As the planned time approached, she suggested that Martin check whether they had enough wood for the fireplace. "I think we do," he said. "Check anyway," she insisted, chivying him gently toward the back of the house. When he was out of sight, she moved quickly to the front door and opened it a crack, letting in a gust of cold air. Harry stood on the porch in the red suit, beard fluffed, hat slightly crooked, eyes shining with a seriousness that surprised her. "Ready," he whispered. She nodded. "Remember," deep voice, "and do not talk about his father unless he asks." "Of course," Harry said. He stepped back. She closed the door, and a few seconds later there came a heavy knock that echoed through the hallway. Martin, in the back room, froze. Then his entire body lit up, as if someone had plugged him into a socket. He sprinted down the corridor and skidded to a halt near the living room, eyes wide. "Mum?" he gasped. She turned toward him with carefully arranged surprise. "What was that?" she asked. The knock came again, louder, the sound of gloved knuckles on wood. "You should see who that is," she said. Martin crept toward the door as if he were approaching a dragon in a fairy tale. Then, with a deep breath that puffed out his cheeks, he grabbed the handle and pulled. There stood Santa. Red suit, white beard, sack over one shoulder. Snow clung to the boots, real enough to be convincing. The hallway filled with the smell of cold air and wool. "Ho ho ho," rumbled Harry, doing his best impression of a man who lived at the North Pole instead of 3 houses away. For a boy whose world had just been split open by his father's disappearance, the sight landed like proof that not everything was gone. Something powerful and kind had found its way to their small house anyway. The visit itself was simple. Santa asked if he had been good. Martin nodded with the desperate honesty of someone who believed that goodness could somehow bring his father back. Santa asked what he wished for. Martin mumbled something about cars and snow and people staying. Elizabeth watched from the edge of the room, heart clenched, thankful for the beard that hid the neighbour's damp eyes. When Santa handed Martin a gift from the sack, the boy cradled it like something sacred. He did not open it right away. He pressed it to his chest instead, as if the cardboard and paper might transmit some kind of courage. "Thank you," he whispered. Santa nodded gravely. "Remember," he said in that deep borrowed voice, "I always find my way to the houses that need me most." Then he left as ceremoniously as he had arrived, boots thumping down the front steps, the door closing on a swirl of cold air and jingling bells hidden in the folds of his coat. That first year, the act had been meant as a one-time kindness, a temporary patch on a large hole, but grief has a way of turning rituals into lifelines. The following December, when advertising signs began to mention Christmas again and the air grew sharp with frost, Martin had looked up from his homework and said, very casually, "You think Santa remembers our house?" Elizabeth had hesitated. She had considered telling him that Santa might be busy, that maybe they could do something different this year. Then she saw the way his hand tightened slightly around his pencil, the way his shoulders tensed. "Of course he remembers," she said. "Once Santa finds you, he does not forget." So she called Harry. Then, the year after that, when Harry was ill and could not manage, she persuading a co-worker who had the right build and a friendly smile. Later, one year, it was a cousin visiting from a different town. Another time, when no man was available, she improvised with a tall friend who did her best under the weight of fake beard and padded belly. The details changed. The suit remained. The knock at the door always came. Over time, the visits evolved. Santa talked less about toys and more about how proud he was that Martin helped his mother, that he worked hard at school, that he tried his best even when the world felt confusing. As Martin grew, so did the shape of the myth. He stopped telling his classmates that Santa came to his house. He was not completely naive. He understood that most other children had let go of that particular story. He even helped dead or two younger neighbours understand that the man in the shopping centre was just someone dressed up. Yet in his own house, on his own street, on that one night each year, some private part of him still believed that a mysterious kindness visited them, wrapped in red cloth and cinnamon-scented air. For Elizabeth, the Santa ritual became both a comfort and a cage. It gave her structure in those early hard years, something to plan for, a way to transform her fear of failing as a parent into practical tasks. Buy flour, hide the suit, arrange the knock. She watched her son cling to the tradition as he grew from boy to teenager, from teenager to man. Even when his voice broke and his shoulders broadened, he still set out cookies on Christmas Eve with a seriousness that belonged to a much younger age. At first she told herself he was just being playful. Then she realized that the playfulness had a layer under it that was not a joke at all. He was not simply going along with the tradition for her sake. He needed it. When he moved out for a short time, that need followed him. The year he shared a flat, he spent Christmas Eve back at the house as if nothing had changed. The knock came, the suit appeared, the ritual played out. When he moved back permanently not long after, Elizabeth pretended not to see the relief in his face at returning to the old pattern. Years passed like that, gently, stubbornly. Decorations went out and back into boxes. Teachers became bosses. School reports became payslips. Men's styles changed on billboards in town. Yet inside the yellow house, Christmas remained almost exactly the same. The narrator could have drawn a simple conclusion, that they were stuck, that the holiday had become a museum exhibit of their shared refusal to move on. But that would have ignored the softer truth, that rituals can be both chains and blankets at once. In the present day, if you opened the cupboard in the hallway, you would find, behind a stack of winter coats, a carefully folded Santa suit. The beard, a little more worn around the elastic, lay on top. Next to it, a box of ornaments. Every object carried years of whispered secrets, midnight worries, silent promises. Elizabeth knew better than anyone that the night of Harry and the red suit had frozen something in time. Standing in her office during lunch break years later, she stared out the window at the city moving briskly through December. Colleagues talked about flights, new babies, divorces, promotions. Life shifted for them in big, visible ways. She thought of Martin at the electronics store patiently explaining the difference between one set of headphones and another to a stranger. She thought of him walking home to the same kitchen, the same room, the same rituals. Had she kept him from leaving fully, or had he chosen to stay all on his own? The answer, if there was want, lived somewhere in the overlap between them. That night, back home, she pulled down a plastic box from the top of the wardrobe. Inside lay a stack of old photographs. She sat on her bed and flipped through them, the mattress creaking softly beneath her. Here was Martin as a small boy in front of the tree, hair sticking up, eyes huge. Here he was a little older, holding a toy car with exaggerated excitement for the camera. Here again as a teenager, trying to look bored while still glancing toward the door where that year's Santa was about to knock. In Nan photo off to the side, she caught sight of herself. Younger, with a different haircut and less worry etched at the corners of her mouth. Standing in the background, she looked at her son with a mixture of fierce protectiveness and quiet fear. She sighed and closed the box. In the living room, the television murmured. Martin was watching some holiday special he had seen at least 20 times, laughing at the same jokes in the same places. When she joined him, he shuffled along the sofa to make room, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Comfortable?" he asked. "Yes," she answered, sitting down. The show continued. Outside, the snow reflected the lights from the windows of the houses up and down the street. Inside, time felt both very present and slightly frozen, as if the past had never quite let go of its hold. Elizabeth knew that something had to change at some point. Boys were not supposed to stay children forever, no matter how kind their hearts or how devoted their mothers. Yet the idea of dismantling the ritual she had built felt like reaching up to stop a star from shining. So when Martin glanced over at her between scenes and said, in his casual, half-joking tone, "Santa will come this year too, right?" she smiled and said, "Yes, of course he will. He always does." She said it out of habit, out of love, out of fear that if she said anything else, the fragile structure they lived inside would crack. Later, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the familiar quiet sounds of the house. The radiator ticking, the faint hum of the refrigerator, her son's footsteps as he moved in his room down the hall. Christmas had become their shelter and their trap. Somewhere between the first desperate Santa visit and this latest December, the holiday had stopped being just a celebration and turned into the shape of their entire life. She knew that a time would come when the snow globe would have to be shaken, when the figure in the red suit would be revealed as what he always had been, just a person in a costume. She also knew that she had no idea how to do that without breaking something delicate in her son's heart. For now, she told herself, one more year would not hurt. Just one more. In another part of town, a man who would one day wear the red suit for them was finishing his own late shift, unaware that he was about to become part of a story that had started long before he ever trimmed his beard or tried on a Santa hat. Christmas had frozen in time in that yellow house after a man walked out with a bag and a set of car keys. It would take another man in red and an entirely different kind of leaving to finally start it thawing. Chapter 3: A Plan Wrapped in Red Paper. The office in Oslo tried to look festive. Someone had draped a string of lights along the edge of the open-plan ceiling, and a tired fake tree leaned by the window, weighted down by too many anonymous ornaments. A plate of gingerbread cookies sat on a table, slowly getting staler as people promised they would just have one more. Elizabeth sat at a corner table in the cafeteria, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. Outside, the city moved in its brisk winter rhythm. Inside, the hum of printers and small talk rolled together into a familiar drone. Across from her, her colleague Nora pulled off a pair of gloves and sighed with theatrical exhaustion. "I swear," Nora said, "if Funmore Person sends me a meeting invite for the last workday before Christmas, I will start charging extra." Elizabeth smiled. "You would send them a calendar invoice. Professional Grinch fee." Nora grinned and reached for a gingerbread cookie. "That is an idea." They chatted for a while about office politics, vacation plans, and the ongoing minor war over the air conditioning setting. Eventually, as December conversations tend to do, the topic drifted toward family. So, Nora said, "How is your son?" "Martin Wright." The way she said it was kind rather than judgmental, but Elizabeth could hear the unspoken follow-up. "Still at home? Still orbiting your kitchen?" "He is fine," Elizabeth said. "Working a lot, you know how it is before the holidays. Everyone suddenly needs a new gadget." Nora nodded. "My youngest is the same, just with car parts instead of headphones. He at least has moved out, though. Tiny flat, terrible couch, full independence and overflowing laundry basket." There was a light, teasing tone in her voice. Elizabeth accepted it with a practiced half-smile. "Martin likes it at home," she said. "It works for now." Nora took a sip of her coffee. "For now sometimes lasts longer than we think," she replied gently. Elizabeth could have changed the subject, but something in her was tired of dodging, so she breathed in and let the truth come out in a casual tone. "He still wants Santa to visit," she said, "on Christmas Eve." Nora blinked. "You mean he plays Santa for kids in the neighborhood?" "No," Elizabeth said, and a small helpless laugh slipped out. "I mean he still wants Santa to come to our house. To him." Nora stared for a second, then covered her smile with her hand, trying to be respectful and failing just a little. "He knows, though," she said carefully. "Right." "He knows the official version," Elizabeth answered. "But we have the tradition. There is always some kind of Santa. Has been since he was small. I think he half believes and half needs to believe. It is complicated." Nora leaned back, studying her. "And you are still arranging it?" "Every single year," Elizabeth said. "I swear I have worked harder to find men willing to wear that suit than on some of our big projects." Now Nora laughed outright, though there was sympathy in it. "Hire a professional," she said. "There must be some service. Seasonal Santas for all your emotional needs." Elizabeth rolled her eyes. "Yes, I can see the advertisement. Perfect for children and overgrown boys who never moved out." "I am only half joking," Nora replied. "Seriously. Book someone. Make it official. Then maybe it will feel like a performance instead of some family secret. And who knows, maybe it will be the last time. People do grow up, eventually. Even my brother did, and I thought that man would stay 18 forever." The thought stuck with Elizabeth as she went back to her desk. A professional Santa. Someone neutral, not a neighbor bribed with cookies or a cousin dragged in at the last minute. Maybe that was the way to do final big Santa visit. Make it almost theatrical. Then afterward, when the glow faded, she could sit Martin down and talk to him as an adult about what the ritual had really been doing all this time. On her computer, she pretended to check a spreadsheet while her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she opened a browser and typed in a search. Santa for Hire Oslo. The results were an odd parade. There were cheerful websites with stock photos of men in red suits, laughing next to bewildered children. There were contact numbers for freelance performers who did everything from birthday clowns to holiday characters. There was even an unlisting that promised an urban street-style Santa for modern events, which she closed quickly before the image could lodge in her brain. Eventually she found a local agency that listed a more traditional Santa performer. The description mentioned experience, warm personality, professional costume, and the ability to handle both large events and private home visits. There was a contact form. She hesitated for the length of 2 slow breaths, then began to type. Private Christmas Eve visit. 1 adult son, long-running tradition, sensitive situation, please no jokes that are too cruel. She read it back, grimaced and softened the text. Leaving out the more embarrassing details still left the main point clear. Someone was needed who could play the role seriously. She pressed send. By the time she walked out of the office that afternoon, the sky had already dimmed into early winter dusk. On the tram back toward her town, she checked her phone. A reply waited in her inbox. Thank you for your message. I would be happy to help. My name is Mark. We can meet to discuss details and make sure it feels right for your family. There was a suggestion for a time in a small cafe by the station in town. Elizabeth looked at the name, Mark. She tried to picture him and came up with nothing more specific than a vague red blur. It felt strange, arranging something so intimate with someone she had never met. At home that evening, Martin hovered around the kitchen with restless energy. The shop was chaos today, he said, chopping vegetables with more enthusiasm than precision. People lose all sense of logic when they are buying gifts. A man tried to return a set of headphones because the box did not feel festive enough. Elizabeth smiled. Did you offer to sing to the box? He snorted. I managed not to. They cooked, they ate. The tree lights blinked in the corner. It was their usual December evening, pattern-worn smooth by years. At done point, as they were clearing the table, Martin stopped and looked at her a bit more closely. You are quiet, he said. Just tired, she replied. End of year. He accepted that answer and began stacking plates. She watched him move through the familiar routine and thought, forever. This cannot be forever. Later, in her room, she replied to Mark. Yes, she would meet him. Yes, they could talk about what to do. Yes, this would probably be the last big Santa visit. She did not say that last part out loud. She barely admitted it to herself. 2 days later, she stood outside a small cafe near the station, breath clouding in the cold air. The window was fogged from inside, glowing with warm light. She checked her phone again, though the time was clear. He should be here any moment. The door opened, and a man stepped out briefly to shake snow off his hat before going back inside. This was not him. Then another man approached from the corner of the street. Dark coat, wool scarf, hair threaded with a few strands of grey. He carried himself with the relaxed posture of someone used to being watched and not minding. His eyes were sharp but kind. Are you Elizabeth? He asked. Yes, she said. Mark. He nodded and held the door for her. Inside, the smell of coffee and baking bread wrapped around them. They found a table near the window, and she placed her gloves on the chair beside her like a little barrier. So, he said, once they had ordered, Santa consultation. That is a new one, she smiled despite herself. I know it sounds strange. Not really, he replied. You would be surprised what people ask for in December. They talked. She explained in general terms about a grown son who clung to an old tradition, about a missing father that had left a hole shaped like absence and holidays, about the Santa ritual that had started as comfort and become a habit too big to easily break. Mark listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed slightly in thought rather than judgment. So he believes, he said when she finished, or wants to. Something like that, she answered. And you? He asked. She tilted her head. Do you believe? He clarified, lips twitching. Not in magic reindeer exactly, in the importance of this ritual. She thought about it, then nodded slowly. I believe it kept us afloat when things were bad, and I believe it stopped him from drifting too far. Maybe it also stopped him from moving forward. Mark considered this. My job, he said, is to step into other people's stories for a short time. I have been Santa in mansions where the parents hide in the kitchen because they feel guilty about never being home. I've been Santa in men-room apartments where the children cling to my coat because they are so hungry for any adult who listens to them. He paused, took a sip of coffee. But this, he went on, this sounds like I'm stepping into something that has been going on for a very long time. Elizabeth nodded. Which is why I wanted to meet you. I cannot have you show up and make some joke about how Santa finally found a midlife crisis support group. He raised his hands. Understood, respectful Santa only. They smiled. The tension eased a little. They discussed practicalities, time of arrival, how long he should stay, where he would knock, what kind of gift he would physically bring, something she would of course provide in advance. Then, as the conversation shifted from logistics to small talk, she realized she was enjoying herself. Mark had an easy humor, the kind that did not demand attention but invited it. He told her about odd gigs he had done, about the cat that hated his Santa suit, about being divorced and rebuilding a life on seasonal job at a time. You must get hit on a lot, she said before she could stop herself. Then she shook her head. Sorry, that was not very professional. He laughed. It is fine. The answer is, occasionally. Usually by drunk uncles at company parties. Less charming than you might imagine. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and focused on stirring her coffee, as if it needed that much attention. She had not sat across from a man who looked at her as a woman rather than just as someone's mother in a long time. The realization made her feel a little unsteady, like standing up too fast. When they parted outside the cafe, Mark adjusted his scarf and gave her a steady look. I will be there on Christmas Eve, he said. I promise to take it seriously. Thank you, she replied. As he walked away, coat dark against the pale street, she found herself noticing the line of his shoulders, the way he moved. She scolded herself silently. This is about Martin, she thought. This is about helping him let go. Still, as she rode the tram home, there was a small unfamiliar flutter under her ribs. Not quite fear, not quite excitement. Something closer to the feeling of opening a gift when you do not know if you should be receiving one at all. At home, Martin greeted her from the kitchen, where he had managed to burn something just enough to fill the room with a smoky smell. There was an incident with the oven, he announced. It is mostly under control. She opened a window and waved at the invisible disaster. You and that oven, she said with mild sarcasm. One day you will learn to set a timer. He grinned. Where would the suspense be in that? They cleaned up together, laughed, and settled into their usual evening routine. Yet under the familiar rhythm, something had shifted. Elizabeth now held a secret plan. The last big Santa performance was on its way, wrapped not only in red fabric, but in the possibility of change. Chapter 4. Santa Without the Suit. Mark lived in a small flat on the top floor of an older building not far from the old industrial docks. It had slanted ceilings, creaky floors, and a view of the river if you craned your neck in just the right direction. On his kitchen table lay the tools of his seasonal trade. A carefully folded red suit, a belt that had clearly seen some things, a white beard, polished boots. He kept everything clean and in good condition, not out of vanity, but because he saw the job as something more than playing dress-up. On a late December evening, 2 nights before Christmas Eve, he sat at the table feeding his cat, a large ginger creature with the unlikely name of Princess. She ate as if the world were ending tomorrow and it was her duty to empty the bowl. You know, he said to her, people think this work is all ho-ho-ho and jingling bells. Princess, as usual, did not argue. He glanced at the small notebook where he kept his schedule. Corporate event, shopping centre, private home visit. Another private home visit. He had written Elizabeth's name there with the word sensitive underlined beside it. He thought about her as he rinsed his cup in the sink, the way she had kept one hand wrapped around her coffee as if it were the only warm thing she could hold on to. The way her eyes had brightened when she laughed, despite the tired lines around them. Mark was not a romantic hero hiding under a red coat. He was a man in his late 40s who had gone through a divorce that had divided years into before and after. He had made mistakes. He had sat in mediation rooms feeling like a child who had failed a test. He had eaten more frozen dinners alone than he cared to count. The Santa work had started as a favor for a friend who needed someone to fill in at an event years ago. He had discovered two things that night. First, children were far better judges of character than adults gave them credit for. Second, he was unexpectedly good at stepping into a role that required warmth and presence without demanding anything in return. He had kept doing it. The extra money helped. So did the feeling that, for a few hours at a time, he was allowed to embody a version of himself that was uncomplicatedly kind. But this upcoming visit to the Yellow House felt different. It was not about children squealing over toys. It was about a man who should have left childhood behind, and had not, and a mother torn between protecting and releasing him. Mark felt the weight of it. He sat down at the table again and opened his notebook to a blank page. At the top he wrote Martin's name, then under it a list. Do treat him with respect, never mock his belief, acknowledge his age, say something kind about change, do not joke about him still living at home, flirt in front of him, make the ritual feel cheap. He tapped the pen against the paper, then added, almost as an afterthought, do not forget this is about them, not about you. Princess jumped onto the table and sat on the notebook as if to enforce the rule. Message received, he told her. The next day, between events, Mark found himself thinking about Elizabeth again. Not in a professional list-making way, but in the quieter gaps between tasks. How she had pushed a strand of hair behind her ear when she was trying to explain the history, without giving away too much. How she had looked at him with a mixture of hope and embarrassment, trusting a stranger with a fragile part of her life. He knew he should not dwell on it. It was risky, letting his personal feelings wander into his work. But he was only human, and humans are notoriously bad at drawing clean lines inside themselves. On the other side of town, Elizabeth stood in front of her wardrobe. It looked like a modest archive of her adult life. Work blouses, comfortable jeans, a couple of dresses that had only seen the inside of restaurants on rare occasions. She had told herself she was simply deciding what to wear for Christmas Eve. A red sweater, perhaps. Something cozy and unremarkable. No reason to overthink it. Yet her hand kept pausing on a dark green dress she had bought last year and never worn. It was not dramatic, just a little more fitted than her usual choices, with sleeves that ended at the elbow and a neckline that suggested she remembered once having a collarbone. It would be ridiculous, she told herself, to wear this for a night mostly spent with her son and a man in a Santa suit. She took the dress off the hanger and laid it on the bed, just in case, she thought. The day before Christmas Eve, the house smelled of baking. Martin moved around with a sense of mission, as if the safety of the entire world depended on whether their gingerbread came out crisp or soft. These are not right, he said, examining no tray. The edges are too dark. Santa will think we are trying to poison him. Elizabeth tasted wine. It was perfectly fine, the slight browning adding a deeper flavour. They are good, she said. He will survive. Martin made a sceptical noise but allowed the cookies to cool on the rack. He had no idea she had already sent Mark a message about their traditional snack. Santa is fine with whatever you bake, Mark had replied. I've eaten far worse and survived. She had laughed alone in the kitchen reading that, feeling oddly lighter. That evening, when Martin went to his room, she stood in the doorway for a moment watching him sort through a box of old decorations. You do not need to use all of those, she said. I know, he answered. I am just looking. His voice was softer than usual, as if he were speaking to the past rather than to her. She almost told him then, almost sat on the edge of his bed and said, This year we have hired a professional Santa, and after that, we need to talk about letting the myth go. But he looked up with such unconcealed excitement when he said, It is going to be a good Christmas Eve, I can feel it, that the words dried up in her throat. In her room later, she took a breath and sent one more message to Mark. Please remember he is sensitive, she wrote. He uses jokes, but he feels things deeply. He answered within a few minutes. I understand, he wrote. I will be careful. And I meant what I said. I am honoured you trust me with this. She stared at the screen a moment longer than necessary. It had been a while since any man had told her he felt honoured by anything she did, outside of a formal work meeting. On Christmas Eve morning, Mark woke to the faint sound of snowplows in the distance and the very loud sound of Princess knocking something off the windowsill. He shuffled to the kitchen, made coffee, and looked at his schedule with more time. The yellow house was his last visit of the night. He had arranged it that way on purpose. He did not want to rush through it. He ironed the edge of his red coat, brushed the beard, checked the belt. Each small act of maintenance felt like part of a quiet ritual, a way of stepping into the mind of the character he was about to become. When he finally left his flat that afternoon, costume bag over one shoulder, he caught his reflection in the mirror by the door, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and lines at the corners, heading out to comfort strangers. He gave himself a brief nod. "You have done stranger things," he told his reflection. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was navigating the chaos of Christmas Eve at home. Martin had woken early, as if he were 8 years old again, and had been moving through tasks with brisk focus. Tree lights on, check. Tablecloth ironed, check. Dinner preparation started, check. Cookie plate selected with the seriousness usually reserved for legal documents, check. He'd even changed into a fresh sweater without being reminded. It was another festive win, of course featuring a snowman who looked alarmingly cheerful. "You look very seasonal," Elizabeth said when he walked into the kitchen. "That is the goal," he answered. She wore the green dress. When she stepped into the kitchen, she felt his eyes rest on her for a moment in a way that surprised her. "You look nice," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "It is Christmas, might as well pretend I'm going to a party." He frowned lightly. "You sort of are, we are having our own party." She smiled to soften it. "Yes, of course." All day her thoughts moved in loops, cooking, setting the table, checking her phone, imagining Mark knocking on the door in full costume, wondering if she was out of her mind. She told herself over and over that this was about closure. The final performance of a role she had written for herself years ago, now outsourced to a professional so she could finally put down the script. She did not say out loud that part of her also wanted to see Mark again, to find out whether the warmth she had felt at the cafe had been a trick of mood or something real. While the daylight faded, the town outside their windows carried on with its own rituals. Families bundled up and walked to church. Teens posted photos in shiny outfits before heading to parties. Someone set off a small firework early, too impatient to wait until later. Inside the yellow house, time narrowed to a single expectation. Santa would come. He always did. But before he put on the suit that would make him part of their story, he was just a man walking through the cold. Before she opened the door to him in front of her son, she was just a woman in a green dress, standing in a hallway and wondering when exactly her life had become a long Christmas rehearsal. By the time the clock crept toward evening, everything was in place. The table was set, the food warmed in the oven, the tree shone in the corner like it had been waiting all year for this shift in attention. Martin hovered near the window. He tried to pretend he was simply checking the weather, but his eyes tracked every shadow that moved across the street. "You know he is not going to land on the roof," Elizabeth said with a hint of sarcasm. "Insurance would never cover that." Martin laughed. A short burst. Still, he might have upgraded his transport. Sleighs are not very climate-friendly. He said it as a joke, but he still checked the front walk again. Just in case. Elizabeth glanced at the clock. Her heart picked up. Mark, somewhere out in the cold, adjusted the strap on his costume bag and turned the corner that would bring the yellow house into view. For a moment he paused, take in the decorations in the neighborhood, the warm rectangles of light in the windows, the faint smell of something sweet in the air. Then he walked toward the house where he was expected, ready to step into the red suit and, for a short time, into the center of a story that had been waiting for its turning point for many years. Chapter 5. Christmas Eve at the End of the World. The afternoon sky had given up on trying to be dramatic. It was just a flat, pale grey, the colour of unprinted paper, the kind of sky that made the lights in every window work overtime. Inside the yellow house, the universe narrowed down to steam from pots, the flash of cutlery, and the familiar background hum of the holiday playlist doing its duty for yet another year. Martin stood at the kitchen counter with the seriousness of someone disarming a seasonal device. In front of him, a row of potatoes waited to be peeled. He held the peeler like a man prepared for battle. "Operation Christmas," he announced. "Phase 3, potatoes." Elizabeth moved past him with a dish of vegetables, shaking her head with a small smile. "You skipped phase 2, she said. He frowned. She opened the oven to check the roasting pans. "That would be phase 2, she explained. "Vegetables before potatoes. Chronology matters." "You should write a manual," he said. "The complete guide to surviving Christmas Eve with minimal casualties." She tapped the edge of the pan. "No one is allowed to use the word casualties in this kitchen on this day," she answered. He lifted his hands in a gesture of surrender, then went back to peeling. The skins fell into the bowl with soft thuds, building a strange little nest of curls. In the living room, the tree glowed as if it had been waiting all year to show off. The ornaments were a mix of eras. There were shiny store-bought baubles, faded constructions from his childhood, and that one lopsided angel that refused to break no matter how many times it had fallen. On the coffee table, the official Santa plate had been chosen and placed with ceremony. It was a simple white plate with a blue rim and a tiny chip on one side. That chip had become part of the tradition now. The plate would look wrong without it. Next to it, an empty glass waited for whatever drink would be declared Santa fuel this year. There had been experiments over time. Milk when Martin was small, hot chocolate in his teenage rebellion against calcium. Last year he had decided that Santa was old enough for a small glass of red wine. He was still undecided for this year. You could not just change Santa's drink without thinking about it. These things had consequences, even if only in his own head. The smell of dinner drifted through the house in waves. Roast meat, spices, gravy, something sweet baking somewhere. It wrapped itself around the furniture and settled in the curtains like a domestic ghost. Every few minutes, Martin would pause in his kitchen task, wipe his hands, and check the clock in the hallway. He would then pretend he had simply needed to stretch his legs or check the heating. Elizabeth watched these small detours without commenting. She saw the way his eyes flicked to the window, as if he expected to see something other than snow and the occasional passing car. She moved through her own set of rituals: stir the gravy, taste the sauce, adjust the music volume, reply once more to the message from Mark confirming his arrival time. "I am on schedule," he had written, "do not worry." Why do people always say that, she thought, even as her shoulders relaxed a little. As if worrying was something she could put down just because they suggested it. A little later the doorbell rang. Not the Santa knock, just the ordinary doorbell. Martin almost dropped a potato. "Calm down," Elizabeth said. "Santa does not use the bell. He has more style than that." He snorted, half amused, half embarrassed at having reacted so quickly. Elizabeth wiped her hands on a towel and went to the door. When she opened it, the winter air pushed in alongside her neighbour, Liv. Liv was wrapped in a thick coat and an even thicker scarf. She carried a tin decorated with cartoon reindeer and smelled faintly of perfume and cold air. "Merry Christmas," she said warmly, handing over the tin. "I brought cookies." "As if you do not have enough of those already." "You can never have too many," Elizabeth replied automatically. "Come in." Liv stepped inside, stamping snow off her boots. She had known Elizabeth since before Martin was born. Their lives had overlapped in school events, shared babysitting favours, and the casual conversations of people who spent years borrowing sugar from each other. "Martin, come say hello," Elizabeth called. He appeared in the doorway with a peeler in one hand and a potato in the other, as if this were his natural state. "Hi, Liv," he said, smiling. "Merry Christmas." "And to you," she answered. "Still helping your mother with everything, I see. Someone has to supervise quality control," he said, deadpan. Liv laughed, then turned to Elizabeth with a more searching look. "He looks well," she said. "He is," Elizabeth replied. "Busy at work." Liv nodded slowly. "My oldest is flying in tomorrow," she said. "He is staying a few days, then going back to Bergen. Hard to keep them in place when they grow up." Martin looked away, attention suddenly very focused on the tin in his mother's hand. She continued, not unkindly. "You must enjoy having yours still at home." "I do," Elizabeth said. "Most of the time." There was a small pause there, filled with everything she did not say. That she sometimes lay awake at night wondering if she had done him a disservice by making home so comfortable that leaving seemed unnecessary. That she felt guilty for liking the company. Liv, being a perceptive person and a long-time friend, heard at least some of what remained unspoken. "Well," she said, "your house always looks the most Christmassy on the street. That must count for something." Martin relaxed a little. "That is the goal," he replied. "We have a reputation to maintain." They chatted for a while, exchanging the usual news of the street, who had bought a new car, which family had finally replaced their roof, the rumour that the small supermarket might close after the new year. Eventually Liz pulled her scarf back on. "I will let you get back to your preparations," she said. "Do not burn anything." Martin raised his hand in mock salute. "No promises." After she left, the house felt slightly different. The outside world had stepped inside briefly, looked around, and left again, leaving behind a faint echo of comparison. Elizabeth put the tin on the counter. "Do not touch those before tomorrow," she warned automatically. "As if I would," he said, already opening the lid. The hours folded themselves into another. Dinner was served and eaten in a comfortable rhythm. The television showed the usual holiday programs, scenes they could recite line by line. Somewhere in the background, church bells rang out over the town, marking the evening. By the time they finished the last bites and cleared the plates, it was full dark outside. Streetlights reflected on the snow. Across the road, someone had placed a lighted star in their window, its points glowing against the night. Martin took his role as cookie coordinator seriously. He selected a few of the best gingerbread hearts, arranged them carefully on the chipped plate, then added one of Liv's cookies for variety. "Santa should experience the full range of local baking," he said. Elizabeth poured a small glass of red wine and placed it beside the plate. "Wine again?" he asked. She lifted a brow. "Do you think he prefers juice?" Martin considered it. "No," he said finally. "Wine is fine. It fits the mood." He set the plate and glass on the coffee table, adjusting them by a fraction of an inch until they were perfectly centered. Then he stepped back and surveyed the scene. Tree lit? Check. Gifts under the tree? Check. Soft lighting that made the room feel like a memory? Check. Everything ready for the arrival of a man he had never met, and yet felt he had known his entire life. He sat on the sofa, trying to act casual, one leg bouncing with nervous energy. "Remember," he said, "do not forget to act surprised." Elizabeth sank down into the armchair, smoothing her green dress over her knees. "I am a professional at being surprised," she said dryly. He nodded. "True." In the quiet that followed, the playlist shifted to an older song, one of those with soft strings and a singer whose voice sounded like it had already lived through several winters. Elizabeth glanced at the clock. The agreed time approached. Her heart matched the ticking for a few seconds, just to keep things interesting. Outside, Mark stood at the corner of the street. He had changed into the Santa suit in his car a block away, like some slightly ridiculous superhero. The red coat sat well on his frame, the beard was securely fastened, the boots were heavier than his usual shoes, making his steps sound more decisive. He adjusted his hat, took a breath, and began walking toward the yellow house. From the window, Martin saw a shadow move. He straightened so fast the sofa creaked. "Someone is coming," he said, mostly to himself. Elizabeth followed his gaze. The figure approached along the path. Red coat, white trim. That specific sway of someone carrying a sack. She felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. This was it. The moment she had engineered for years and dreaded in equal measure. The figure disappeared from view as he reached the front step. In the hallway, a faint crunch of snow under boots. Then a knock on the door. Not loud, not timid. A steady, measured knock that seemed to reach back into all the past Christmas Eves in that house and gather them together. Martin inhaled as if the air had suddenly become scarce. He looked at his mother, she looked back. For a second they shared the same thought and different versions of reality. "He is here," his eyes said. "This has to end well," hers replied. "Do you want me to get it?" he asked. "It is your house too," she answered, her voice surprisingly calm. He stood, smoothed his sweater, and walked toward the hallway. Each step sounded too loud in his own ears, like a drumbeat announcing something that felt bigger than the simple act of opening a door. At the doormat, he paused, hand on the handle. He closed his eyes for one heartbeat, then pulled the door open. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of snow and wool and something else he could not name. On the step stood Santa. Chapter 6. Santa enters through the front door. For a moment, Martin simply stared. His brain took inventory the way it always did when confronted with something that mattered too much. Red coat, white fur trim, black boots, dusted with snow, a sack over one shoulder, the fabric bulging with hidden shapes, a thick white beard that left only the eyes clearly visible. Those eyes were kind. Older than his own, but not ancient. Clear, steady, watching him with the calm of someone who had seen far stranger doorways than this. "Ho, ho, ho," the man said, voice deep and warm. It was a good ho-ho-ho. Not forced, not mocking. The kind that came from a chest that had laughed often, even when life had not been particularly funny. Martin felt something unclench in his chest. The invisible knot that had been tightening all afternoon loosened. "Santa," he said, trying to sound casual and failed. The figure nodded solemnly. "That is the rumor," he replied. "May I come in? It is cold enough out here to freeze my beard solid." Martin stepped aside automatically. "Yes." "Of course." Santa stamped his boots gently on the mat, respecting the house more than some actual relatives ever had. The hallway filled with his presence, the red of the coat bright against the muted walls. Elizabeth appeared in the living room doorway, putting on the expression of someone who definitely had not arranged all of this with military-level precision. "Well now," she said with practiced astonishment, "look who found his way here." Santa inclined his head. "Good evening, Elizabeth," he said. Martin blinked. "You know my mother?" he asked, genuinely surprised. Santa gave a little shrug. "I try to keep track of the people who have kept Christmas going when it was difficult," he answered. Elizabeth felt the line land in her chest like a small, gentle stone. Mark had promised he would take it seriously, and he was delivering. The three of them moved into the living room as if stepping onto a stage they had rehearsed for years. Santa took in the tree, the gifts, the carefully arranged cookie plate and wine glass. "Ah," he said appreciatively, "you have prepared a proper welcome." That is rare these days. Some people forget that visiting all these houses is very hungry work. Martin smiled, suddenly shy. "We did not want you to think we had become lazy," he said. "Impossible," Santa replied. He sat down on the edge of the armchair, setting his sack beside him with a soft thud. The suit rustled quietly. The beard moved when he spoke, but did not betray its artificial roots. "So Martin," he said, "I hear you have been helping your mother a lot this year." Martin shot a quick glance at Elizabeth, offended and pleased at the same time. "You have access to reports," he said. Santa chuckled. "Something like that." He asked about Martin's job at the electronics store. Mark had taken notes during his meeting with Elizabeth, and now he used them with care, weaving specific details into his question, without sounding like a man reading from a file. "How is it," he asked, "helping people choose little boxes and cables that they do not understand? Does it make you feel like a magician sometimes?" Martin laughed. "More like a translator," he said. "Human language into tech language and back. A useful skill," Santa said. "The world always needs translators." They spoke of small things, but the conversation carried a quiet respect. Mark did not talk to him like a child, despite the suit. He did not tease him for his obvious excitement. He treated him like an adult who still had access to a tender part of himself most men tried to bury. At that point, Martin asked the question he secretly always asked in some form. "Do you ever get tired," he said, "of going everywhere, of people wanting things?" Santa leaned back slightly, considering. "Yes," he said honestly. "There are nights when my feet ache and my back complains and I think I will never want to see another chimney in my life." Martin smiled. Relatable. "But," Santa went on, "there are also houses like this where the lights feel like they mean something. where people are doing their best with what they have. Those houses make the tiredness feel less heavy. Elizabeth looked down at her hands, pretending to smooth an invisible crease in her dress so she would not have to meet his eyes. "Do you ever feel forgotten?" Martin asked quietly. Santa tilted his head. "Forgotten how?" "Like people stop believing in you," Martin said, "or in what you stand for, whatever that really is." It was an odd question to ask a man in a red suit, but it was not really being asked of him. It was aimed at every absent father, every lost friend, every promise that had faded with time. Santa nodded slowly. "Some people stop believing," he said. "That is their choice. Grown-up life can be heavy, and sometimes they think that letting go of all magic will make it easier to carry." He leaned forward a bit. "But belief changes shape," he continued. "A child believes I will bring them toys. An adult might believe that someone will show up when it matters, even if they are not wearing a costume. Both kinds of belief are real." Martin swallowed. "So you do not get angry?" he asked. "When people stop believing?" Santa shook his head. "No. We all have seasons. What matters is that we do not stop believing in each other." The sentence hung in the air, too wise for a simple holiday visit, too gentle to feel forced. Elizabeth felt the words land in a part of her that had hardened over the years. She wondered if Mark had practiced that answer, or if it had simply risen up in him at that moment. After a while, Santa reached for his sack with a small grunt. "Now," he said, "I am afraid I am not only here to philosophize. There is a more traditional task as well." He pulled out a wrapped parcel, roughly rectangular, with paper that matched the roll hidden in Elizabeth's wardrobe. The label had Martin's name written in neat letters. Martin took it, fingers brushing the paper with more reverence than most people applied to textbooks. "Thank you," he said, sounding again like the boy he had once been, standing in this same room with a different Santa and a different ache in his chest. "Open it," Santa encouraged. "I have a strict feedback policy." Martin laughed and began to peel the paper away. He did not rip it in chaos the way some people did. He unfolded it carefully, folding the larger pieces before setting them aside, as if even the wrapping deserved a second life. Inside was a set of high-quality headphones. Not the most expensive brand in the shop, but a good one. The kind he had pointed at weeks before, then decided he could not justify buying for himself. He stared at them. "How did you?" he began. Santa made a vague gesture. "I have my ways." In reality, those ways involved Elizabeth taking notes during one of their earlier conversations and then asking a colleague of Martin's for advice. But the effect was the same. "This is," Martin started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. "Thank you. Really." "You are welcome," Santa said. "Consider it a reward for surviving another year of answering questions about cables." They all laughed. The room softened. For a few minutes more they sat there, the three of them, the tree lights reflecting in the window, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air. It felt almost like a painting of a perfect holiday scene. Almost. Under the warmth lay other currents. Elizabeth could feel her heart beating a little faster every time Santa smiled at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way she was starting to recognize as his own, not other characters. Mark, behind the beard, could feel the way her attention moved between her son and him, protective and wary, and something else that made his chest tighten. Martin, who prided himself on missing nothing in this house, registered at least some of that something else without yet knowing what to call it. Eventually, Santa glanced at the clock on the wall. "I should not take up too much of your evening," he said. "There are other stops to make. The sleigh does not drive itself." Martin nodded, though there was a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said, again. Santa stood with a soft rustle of fabric, shoulders straight under the weight of the coat. "Before I go," he said, "I have one more thing to say, if you will indulge me." They both looked at him. "Martin," he said, his voice a little quieter now, "you have done something many people find difficult. You have stayed. You have kept someone company who needed you. That is a gift, even if the world sometimes pretends only moving on counts as growth." Martin swallowed and looked at the floor. But, Santa added gently, even those who stay are allowed to move, when they are ready. Doors can open without closing hearts. The words hit like a soft hammer. Not painful exactly, just heavy with meaning. Elizabeth felt tears prick at the back of her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. Santa nodded to her as well. "And you, Elizabeth," he said, "have done your best to make this house a safe place. That is no small achievement in a world that likes to shout." He took a breath, then added, in a tone that hinted at something beyond the polite script, "You are allowed to be more than this house if you wish." Their eyes met for a brief second, something unspoken crossing between them. Then he smiled, the public Santa smile again. "Now, if I do not leave soon, the Reindeer Union will file a complaint," he said, lightening the mood. Martin laughed. "We must not anger the Reindeer Union," he agreed. Santa moved toward the hallway. Martin followed as he always did to see him out. They paused by the front door. Martin hesitated, then said quietly, "You will come next year too, right?" It was the question of a child and the stamina test of a man. Behind the beard, Mark hesitated. He thought of Elizabeth's plan, of this being the last big performance. He thought of the promise he could make and the one he could not keep. "I think," he said carefully, "that by next year you may have your own ideas about what Christmas should look like. If I am needed, I will find your door." It was not a yes. It was not quite a no. It was an invitation to imagine something different. Martin frowned slightly, trying to decode the answer. Before he could push, Santa reached out and placed a gloved hand briefly on his shoulder. "You will be fine," he said softly. "Remember that belief can change shape and still be yours." Then he stepped out into the cold. Martin watched him go down the path, red coat bright against the snow. Elizabeth stood in the living room doorway, watching her son's back, and the way his shoulders seemed to sag a little as the figure moved away. She inhaled, ready to say something, anything. Before she could, there was a small knock on the door again. Softer this time. Martin looked puzzled. "Did he forget something?" he asked. Elizabeth's heartbeat stumbled. She had arranged that Mark would return for a moment, out of costume, to settle the payment and collect some food she had packed. She forced her face into neutrality. "Maybe," she said. Martin opened the door again. This time the man standing there was still tall, still with kind eyes, but the red coat and beard were gone. He wore a dark jacket, scarf loosened, hair a little flattened where the hat had been. He held the sack, now looking like an ordinary bag slung over his shoulder. "Hi," he said, suddenly just a person. "I seem to have left something behind." Martin blinked. "You are," he began, then stopped. The lines on the face were the same. The eyes were the same. Elizabeth appeared by his side. "Mark," she said, voice steady. Mark nodded. "I hope it is all right if I step in for a moment," he said. There were a few practical things to handle. The moment stretched. The myth that had just left by the front path had walked back in as a man with hat hair. Martin stepped aside automatically, still processing. "Sure," he said slowly. "Come in." Mark entered, the warmth of the house wrapping around him. He looked different without the costume, yet also more real in a way that made Elizabeth's stomach tighten. Martin closed the door behind him. For a heartbeat, the three of them stood in the hallway again, but the energy was completely different. The suit was gone. The performance was over. Whatever happened now would belong completely to them. Elizabeth, feeling something shift under her feet, gestured toward the kitchen with hostess reflexes. "I packed some food for you," she said. "It is the least we can do." Mark smiled. "That is very kind." As they moved toward the kitchen together, Martin lingered in the hallway, looking at the empty hook where his scarf hung, and the place beside it where the red coat had just been. Santa had entered through the front door twice in one night, once as a story, once as a man. Somewhere deep inside him, something old and frozen gave the smallest of cracks. Chapter 7. The Sound at the Wrong Time. The kitchen looked different without the Santa suit in it. The red had gone, leaving behind the softer colors of normal life. beige walls, wooden cabinets, a slightly crooked calendar with snowy landscapes for each month. Mark stood by the counter holding the plastic box of leftovers that Elizabeth had packed for him. The box steamed faintly, a small weather system of gravy and vegetables. "You really did not need to do this," he said. "It is a matter of principle," she replied. "No visitor leaves this house hungry, not even mythical ones." He smiled, the serious lines of Santa replaced by something more relaxed. "You say that like you have been running a secret inn for years." "Sometimes it feels like that," she said. From the living room came the faint sound of the television. Martin had settled on the sofa with his new headphones, half testing them, half hiding inside the familiar glow of a holiday movie. Elizabeth could feel his presence even when she could not see him. It was a habit developed over years, the constant mental awareness of where her child was in the house. Even now, when that child was technically an adult, the habit stayed. "Thank you," Mark said again, shifting the box in his hands, "for trusting me with this, with your son, with the whole strange, beautiful mess." "You did well," she answered. Her voice was calm, but she felt oddly unsteady. The way he had spoken in the living room still echoed in her mind. "You are allowed to be more than this house." He had said it as Santa, but the man behind the beard clearly agreed. They stood in the small kitchen, the air warm from the oven, the light golden and soft. A song from the playlist drifted in, some classic tune about snow falling and hearts being bright. "Would you like a glass of wine before you go?" she heard herself ask. The practical part of her brain immediately raised a hand in protest. "He is working. He is a stranger. Your son is in the next room. You do not invite seasonal workers for a drink on Christmas Eve." But Mark simply nodded. "One glass," he said, "if it is no trouble." Trouble, she thought, was an interesting word for what might be happening here. She took out 2 glasses, poured carefully, and handed one to him. They clinked the edges in a small, almost shy toast. "To surviving another Christmas Eve," Mark said. "To surviving," she agreed. They sat at the small kitchen table, facing each other across a checked tablecloth that had seen more family dinners than most restaurants. For a few minutes they made safe conversation about trivial things: the weather, the number of Santa gigs he had done that week, the way people became slightly unreasonable when tinsel was involved. Slowly, the conversation deepened. "Do you ever get tired of being the cheerful one?" she asked. He thought about it. "Yes," he said, "but I also know what it feels like when people stop showing up, so I keep going." She nodded, staring into her glass. "My ex-husband was very charming at parties," she said. "Very good at arriving with flair. Less good at staying when things got ordinary." Mark watched her face, not with the nosy curiosity of someone collecting gossip, but with the attentive stillness of someone who understood that say these things cost effort. "How long has it been?" he asked. "Since he left." "More than a decade," she said. "Some days it feels like 3 days, some days like 3 lifetimes." Mark nodded slowly. "I am sorry," he said. She shrugged, a small jerky motion. "You get used to it," she said. "The empty chair at the table, the space in the bed, the way people tilt their heads when they ask how you are doing. Eventually they stop asking. You become the reliable one. The woman who always brings extra dessert and fills in when the school needs volunteers." He smiled softly. "Those women keep the world from collapsing," he said. "Sometimes it feels like the world is quite happy to let them," she answered. He took a sip of wine. "And your son," he said carefully. She let out a breath that had been waiting all evening. "Martin is kind," she said. "Loyal. Funny. He has this sweetness that the world does not always reward. But he is also stuck, and I am not innocent in that." "You built the nest," he said. "And then I added extra blankets," she replied, lips twisting, "and fairy lights, and a Santa who always shows up." Mark was quiet for a moment. "Fathers leave in many ways," he said. "Sometimes by walking out the door, sometimes by staying and disappearing emotionally." She looked at him sharply. "You have children," she guessed. "One," he said. "A daughter. She is grown now. Studies in another city. We talk, but it is not the same as when she was small and thought I could fix everything with a Santa story." "Do you play Santa for her?" Elizabeth asked. He smiled. She would unalive me if I tried, but she still sends me photos of her tree, and sometimes she calls on Christmas Eve when she thinks I will not answer because I am busy. That is the trick. She does not have to risk feeling rejected if I do not pick up. Do you answer? Elizabeth asked. Always, he said, even if I have to step outside and pretend I was checking the reindeer. Elizabeth laughed, the sound surprised out of her. You really are very committed to this role, she said. It keeps me from feeling completely useless, he replied calmly. When my marriage ended, I realized I had spent years being good at telling stories to other people's children while not hearing the whine in my own house. The Santa work helps me at least be present for strangers, even if I cannot change the past. She studied him for a moment, the lines on his face, the way his hands cradled the glass. You are too hard on yourself, she said. So are you, he answered. There was a silence then, but not an empty one. It was filled with the shared understand of two people in the same general age range who had spent a long time being the steady ones for others and not so much for themselves. From the living room came a burst of canned laughter from the television, quickly muffled as Martin adjusted the volume with his new headphones. He cannot hear us, she said. Those headphones block out everything. Mark nodded, then he looked at her more directly. You look beautiful tonight, he said. She blinked. The compliment landed like an unexpected gift she did not know how to unwrap. I am wearing a dress from last year that I never used, she replied, tone half light, half defensive. That is not exactly dramatic. He tilted his head. You are a woman who has carried a house on her shoulders for many years and still manages to look like this at the end of the day, he said. I think that qualifies as dramatic. Her cheeks warmed. She looked away, focusing on a tiny scratch on the table instead. It has been a long time since anyone said anything like that, she admitted. That is a failure of the people around you, not of you, he said. She laughed softly. Careful, she said. Keep talking like that, and I will start expecting things. You should, he replied quietly. She lifted her eyes to his. For a moment the years between them, the costumes, the rituals, all fell away, leaving just a man and a woman at a small kitchen table on a winter night. The rational part of her brain raised all the usual objections. This is complicated. This is fast. Your son is in the next room. You barely know this man. Another part of her, one that had stood in front of the wardrobe and chosen the green dress, whispered something else. Something about being alive now, not just dutiful. Mark set his glass down, the small sound loud in the quiet room. Elizabeth, he said, I do not want to cross a line you are not comfortable with. But I also do not want to pretend I do not feel something here. She swallowed. The room felt very small and very large at the same time. Neither do I, she said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back. She did not. His hand found hers on the table, their fingers intertwined with the tentative certainty of people who had not done this in a long while. In the living room, Martin laughed at something on the television, oblivious for the moment. Elizabeth looked at their joined hands. This is absurd, she murmured. Most good things are, Mark replied. They sat like that for a while, hand in hand, the weight of their lives resting between them like a shared coat on a cold bench. Finally she stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Come, she said, voice low. He rose too. There was no rush, no dramatic grabbing. They simply moved together through the hallway, two adults following an impulse that had been building over hours and years. The door to her bedroom closed with a gentle click. The light under it dimmed. What happened in that room was not cinematic. Two people who had been lonely for too long rarely look like movie scenes when they finally allow themselves closeness. There were awkward moments, soft laughter, the careful removal of layers between them, emotional more than physical, the sense of something opening that had been locked up for years. What mattered was not the mechanics but the feeling. Elizabeth, for the first time in a very long time, letting herself be held without calculating what needed to be done next. Mark, for the first time in a very long time, allowing himself to give attention without a script or a costume. In the quiet afterward, the house felt different. The radiator still hissed. The tree still glowed. The television still flickered. But the air in none room carried the warmth of two people breathing in sync. Down the hallway, in his own room, Martin lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. The movie had ended. The headphones lay around his neck, hen ear cup askew. He should have been drifting towards sleep, full of food and faintly stunned happiness. Instead, his mind hummed. The visit had been good, better than good. Santa had been kind, funny, thoughtful. The gift was perfect. The words about staying and moving on had lodged somewhere deep, but something else tugged at him. A sense that the edges of his world were not quite where he had always thought they were. He heard a soft sound in the hallway, a door closing, then quiet. He frowned slightly, sat up, and pulled the headphones off completely. The house sounds came back like a tide. For a while there was nothing unusual, just the faint hum of the refrigerator, the murmur of the heating, the distant sound of a car passing outside. Then, slowly, he became aware of another sound, muffled, from the direction of his mother's room. At first he thought it was the television. Maybe she had put something on low volume, but the tone was not right. The rhythm was not right. There were pauses that lasted just too long, then resumed with soft, indistinct noises. He tried not to listen. He told himself it was none of his business. He turned on his side, pressed his pillow over wet ear, and tried to focus on remembering the exact moment Santa had handed him the gift. The sounds continued. Not loud, not explicit, just the unmistakable cadence of two people not sleeping. His stomach clenched. He sat up again, the room suddenly too small. An odd tightness was building in his chest, a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and something that felt suspiciously like anger but did not have a clear target. He swung his legs off the bed and stood. His feet found the familiar path down the hallway almost without his consent. "This is stupid," he told himself. "Go back to bed. Do not be weird. You are a grown man. Grown men do not investigate nighttime noises like jealous 5-year-olds. But he kept walking. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint glow from the living room. The door to his mother's room was not fully closed. It stood slightly ajar, as it often did when she was reading before sleep. From inside came the low murmur of voices, a deeper pun and hers, breathy and soft, then a rust of covers, then silence, and a small, unmistakable sound that made his ears burn. He froze outside the door, heart pounding. He could turn back. He could pretend he had not come this far. Instead, as if pulled by something older than his current age, he moved closer and pushed the door a little further open. The room was lit only by the bedside lamp, turned low. The outlines were soft, but clear enough. The bed, the tangle of covers, the shape of his mother, hair loosened, face turned toward the man beside her. The shape of Mark, unmistakably himself now that the beard and hat were gone, his arm wrapped around her, their bodies close in a way that needed no explanation. They were not doing anything dramatic in that exact moment, just lying together, close, breathing in each other's space, but the intimacy in the scene was louder than any motion. Elizabeth's hand rested on Mark's chest. His face was turned toward hers, eyes half closed, expression soft. Martin felt the world tilt. It was not just that his mother was in bed with someone, not just that the someone was a man he had met only hours before. It was that the man was Santa. The person who had stepped across the border between myth and reality in his living room, and then across another border in this bedroom. An old part of him, the boy who had waited by the tree for a stranger in red to reassure him that he was not forgotten, felt something break. He did not make a sound. The survival habit of a child listening at doors served him well. He simply stood there, heart hammering, then stepped back as silently as he had come. The door eased shut, leaving the scene untouched. Inside, the two adults continued their quiet conversation with hands and breath, unaware of the audience that had almost joined them. In the hallway, Martin leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. Thoughts collided in his head with no time to arrange themselves into neat sentences. My mother, Santa, in that bed, on Christmas Eve, in our house. He was not naive. He understood how adults behaved behind closed doors. He had access to the internet after all. He was perfectly familiar with reality on that level. But he had never been forced to watch his protective mythology and his actual life collide in such a direct, undeniable way. He had imagined his mother going on dates sometimes, in a vague, abstract manner. He had thought of Santa as a role played by various kindly men over the years. He just had not put those ideas together in the same picture. Now the picture existed whether he wanted it or not. He pushed off from the wall and walked back to his room with careful steps, as if sudden movement might cause the entire house to crumble. Once inside, he closed his own door firmly and sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripping his knees. He stared at the floor, where a thread from the rug had come loose and curled like a small question mark. He tried to categorize what he felt. Embarrassment, certainly. Enough to make his ears burn and his face heat. Hurt. A dark, childlike sting, as if someone had taken his favorite story and scribbled on it in ink. Jealousy he did not want to admit to. Not the romantic kind, but the possessive ache of someone who had been center stage in a small world for a long time, and suddenly sensed that the set was being rearranged around him. And under it all, a strange grief, as if something had quietly died at the end of the hallway, without a proper farewell. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, and listened to the house again. The sounds from his mother's room were fainter now, but he could still sense the presence of two people where there had always been Nen. He pulled the blanket over himself like armor, and tried to breathe in a steady rhythm. Outside, snow continued to fall, indifferent to the drama inside the yellow house. The town was full of people finishing dinners, unwrapping gifts, arguing over board games. In Nen's small bedroom, a man in his 30s stared at nothing and realized that his life had just shifted, even if no one had yet said a word about it. Christmas, which had spent so many years frozen in that house, had chosen this precise night to crack. Not with a loud crash, but with the quiet, undeniable sound of a door opening at the wrong time. Chapter 8. The Night That Would Not End. Morning arrived anyway. It always does, no matter how tangled the night has been. The light insists on turning up and revealing what is left. In the yellow house, the day started with the pale glow of winter slipping around the edges of the curtains. Snow had settled deeper during the night, softening the shapes of cars and hedges. The street was quiet, as if the whole neighborhood had agreed to move slowly for one day. Inside, the house smelled faintly of yesterday. Cooking, wine, candle smoke, the ghost of gingerbread. The tree lights were still on, casting small circles on the living room walls. Someone had forgotten to switch them off before bed, or perhaps had done it on purpose, not wanting the magic to end quite yet. Martin woke with the heavy feeling of someone who had not really slept. It was more like he had drifted around in shallow water all night, never fully going under, never fully rising up. For a few seconds he did not remember why his chest felt tight. Then the images from the previous night came back in a rush. The slightly open door, his mother's hair against the pillow, the shape of the man beside her. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes until he saw small bursts of color. It did not change anything, but it gave him something else to focus on for a moment. He considered staying in his room all day. He imagined texting his mother that he felt sick and needed to rest, which would not even be completely untrue. But hiding in his childhood bedroom while the rest of the house pretended nothing had happened seemed like exactly the kind of thing that would trap him in the same loop forever. So he got up, pulled on a sweater and sweatpants, stood in front of the mirror and winced at his reflection. His hair looked like it had lost an argument with physics. His eyes had shadows under them that no amount of Christmas lights could hide. He went out into the hallway. The house felt different. Not in any way you could photograph. The furniture was the same, the decorations were the same, but there was a slightly altered weight in the air, like the atmosphere after a storm that had mostly passed, but left the ground wet. In the kitchen, the kettle was humming. Elizabeth stood at the counter in a robe, hair tied back in a loose knot. She looked more tired than festive, like someone who had run a marathon at night and then been handed a shopping list at dawn. She turned when he entered. For a second, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or simple awareness. She quickly arranged a neutral expression. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he replied. His voice sounded rough even to himself. They moved around each other in the small space with the carefully choreographed politeness of people who were both aware of a large object in the middle of the room and pretending it was just an interesting new piece of furniture. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," he said. She poured. He took the mug. The normal dance, only a little slower. He could feel words gathering behind his teeth, bumping up against his tongue like impatient guests. He swallowed them for the moment and sat at the table instead. "So," he said, aiming for lightness, "did you sleep well?" She almost choked on her own coffee. "I slept," she said, "eventually." That one word hung there like a stray ornament. He stared into his mug as if it were a crystal ball. "Is he still here?" he asked. There. One of the words had slipped out. Elizabeth set her cup down more carefully than necessary. "Mark is in the guest room," she said. "He was too tired to drive home last night. It was late." Martin did not remember them having a guest room, exactly. The small office with a fold-out sofa had apparently been promoted during the night. He made a non-committal sound. The truth, unsanitized, was that he knew Mark had not spent the whole night in the guest room. Parts of it, maybe, but not the important parts. The kettle clicked off. A clock ticked faintly on the wall. The dishwasher waited with its silent metal mouth open for someone to decide whether it deserved to be filled. Elizabeth wrapped her hands around her mug as if it were the only stable thing in reach. "Martin," she said, "we should talk." His jaw tightened. The instinct to run back to his room flared again, like a muscle memory. "Sure," he said, "about Christmas dinner schedule or about the fact that Santa is currently sleeping down the hall." Her shoulders sagged. "About the fact that I am a grown woman who made a choice last night," she said, "and about how that affects you." He laughed, a short, sharp sound that did not feel like humor. "You call it a choice," he said. "I call it the weirdest crossover episode in my personal history." Her lips twitched despite herself. The sarcasm at least was familiar territory. He continued, the words rushing now that they had found a crack. "You spent years building this whole thing," he said. "Santa will always come. The house is a safe snow globe, we have our rituals, then one night I open a door and find out that Santa is in your bed." Her face tightened at the phrase. He could see it land like a slap. "It was not Santa," she said quietly. "It was a man I invited into my life." "Same coat," he said. "No coat," she answered. "That is the point." They looked at each other across the table, the distance suddenly feeling larger than the length of an arm. "I did not mean for you to see," she said. "I know," he replied. "That does not magically unsee it." He looked down, then up again. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with holiday lights. "It is not just the fact that you were with someone," he said. "I mean, I am not 12. I know you are allowed to have a life. Do you?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then shook his head the smallest amount. "Maybe not," he admitted. "Not in practice. In theory, sure, but in my head you still mostly belong to this house." She inhaled sharply. "I belong to myself," she said. Then, more gently, "I have spent a lot of years pretending that was not true." He swallowed. "You picked Santa," he said. "I picked Mark," she replied. "The fact that he wears a costume part-time does not make this less real." Martin rubbed his forehead with one hand, as if he could straighten out his thoughts by smoothing the skin. "Do you like him?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Her answer was immediate, no hesitation. That single syllable rearranged something in his chest. It was one thing to think of last night as a strange accident, a moment of seasonal chaos. It was another to understand that it might be the beginning of something ongoing. "You know nothing about him," he said, hearing the childishness in his own voice and hating it. Her eyes flashed. "I know he listened to me when I talked," she said. "I know he took your feelings seriously even when you did not notice. I know he held me like I was still a person and not just someone's mother who keeps the gravy at the right temperature. That last part came out sharper than she intended. She pressed her lips together, regretting it even as the words hung between them. Martin flinched. "So this is my fault," he said slowly. "No," she answered at once. "No, that is not what I meant." They were both quiet then, staring past each other at nothing. From the small room down the hall came a muffled sound of movement, a door opening, a footstep. Mark appeared in the doorway wearing jeans and a sweater, hair still damp from a quick shower. Without the suit, he looked suddenly more ordinary and more dangerous. Not a mythical figure, but a real man standing in the kitchen of someone else's family drama. "Morning," he said carefully. Both of them turned toward him. The scene would have been funny in another context. Two people at a table, frozen in the middle of an emotional collision, and a third person accidentally walking into the frame. Elizabeth recovered first. "Coffee," she offered. "Please," he said. He moved with the tentative steps of someone who knew very well he might be stepping on a minefield. He accepted the mug, nodded his thanks, and stayed near the counter rather than sitting down, as if ready to retreat if needed. Martin watched him over the rim of his own mug. The man who had been Santa looked back, not flinching, not narrow-eyed, just present. "Thank you for yesterday," Martin said finally. "The Santa part." "You're welcome," Mark replied. There was a pause. You could have parked a small car in that pause. Then Martin added, "And the other parts." Elizabeth nearly dropped her spoon. Mark understood. "I did not mean to cause trouble," he said. "Too late for that," Martin answered. His tone was not cruel, just blunt. Mark nodded, accepting it as fair. "I also did not come here just to play dress-up," he said evenly. "Your mother asked for help with something important. I did the best I could with the role. The rest of what happened is between her and me." Martin opened his mouth to fire something back. Then he closed it. The sentence "between her and me" echoed in his head. He suddenly felt like a boy again, standing in a hallway while adults talked in the next room, their words too low to catch but their decisions reshaping his life. He stood up abruptly. "I need air," he said. Elizabeth half rose. "Martin!" He shook his head. "I will be back," he said. "I am not running away. I need to walk before my brain melts." Without waiting for a reply, he grabbed his jacket from the hook and stepped outside. The cold hit his face like a slap, which was oddly welcome. He walked down the snowy street, past the neighbors' houses, past the supermarket with its half-empty seasonal shelves. The town moved at holiday speed, slower, softer. Families carrying bags, kids dragging sleds, couples walking close together. He felt like he was in a film where everyone else was slightly out of sync with him. He tried to sort his feelings into categories again, but they kept leaking across the lines: hurt, embarrassment, anger, and under it all, something he hated admitting even to himself: fear. Fear that his life as he knew it was slipping away, that the safe routine, the snow-globe world, was being shaken by hands he had not agreed to. He knew, in some rational corner of his mind, that he could not live with his mother forever, that people expected him to move out, to build his own life, to maybe end day bring someone home for Christmas who was not Santa. He had simply not expected the catalyst for that change to be Santa himself turning into his mother's lover. He walked for a long time, boots crunching the snow, until his ears stung and his breath came in little white bursts. Back at the house, inside the kitchen, the silence stretched between Elizabeth and Mark after the door closed. "I should go," Mark said quietly. She looked at him, panic twitching at the corners of her mouth. "He will think you are running away," she said. "He will think whatever he needs to think," Mark answered. "I do not want to make this harder for him by hovering." "You did nothing wrong," she said automatically. He raised an eyebrow. "That is a generous interpretation," he replied. "I walked into a delicate situation in a red suit and walked out with more than leftovers." She closed her eyes briefly. "I chose," she said. "Do not remove my agency to make yourself feel noble." He nodded, accepting the correction. "Fair enough," he said. He set the mug down and stepped closer to her. "I like you, Elizabeth," he said simply. "Not as some fantasy. As you are." She swallowed. "I like you too," she replied. He smiled faintly. Then we will have to handle this like adults, he said, which in my experience is far more difficult than dressing up as Santa. He kissed her forehead, a gesture more tender than passionate, then picked up his things. Tell Martin, he added, that I am not disappearing, even if he prefers that for a while. She nodded. He left, closing the door behind him with gentle care. The house felt bigger without the extra person in it, bigger and emptier at the same time. Elizabeth moved through the rooms picking up small things that did not really need to be picked up. A glass here, a napkin there. She turned off the television, then turned it on again just to stop the silence from pressing too hard. Her mind ran through worst-case scenarios. Martin being angry for months. Martin moving out in a storm of resentment. Martin withdrawing into some internal cave she could not reach. At the same time, a small whisper in her chest insisted that the alternative, continuing as they had forever, was its own kind of slow disaster. An hour later, the front door opened. Martin stepped in, cheeks red from the cold, eyes clearer but no less troubled. He hung his jacket on the hook with exaggerated care. He walked into the living room where she was sitting on the sofa, hands clasped in her lap. "So," he said, "here we are." "Here we are," she echoed. They looked at each other for a long moment, then almost simultaneously laughed, the sound brittle but real. "This is absurd," he said. "A little," she agreed. He sat in the armchair opposite her, elbows on his knees. "I am not a child," he said. "I know," she replied. "But last night I felt like he went on, standing at that door, seeing you with him, with the man who had just been Santa in our living room." She winced. "You saw," she said. He nodded. "Not everything," he added quickly, "just enough." She considered apologizing again, then she realized that sorry, while necessary, was not sufficient. "I did not plan it," she said. "I planned the Santa visit, yes, as a way to give you one more year of the tradition and maybe gently start a conversation about changing it. I did not plan to end up in bed with him." "That is not entirely reassuring," he replied dryly. She sighed. "I am allowed to want someone," she said, "but I understand why this feels like a betrayal." He stared at the carpet for a while. "It feels like you took the one thing that was safe and mixed it with something I do not know how to handle," he said. She nodded. "That is fair," she said. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly. "I keep thinking of all the years you made Santa appear," he said, "all the effort, all the neighbors and cousins you bribed, all to protect me from feeling abandoned." "Yes," she said. "And now," he continued, "it feels like Santa has taken you away from me." There it was, the raw center of the whole mess. She moved to the edge of the sofa. "Martin," she said gently, "know what is taking me away from you." "But I cannot remain only your mother and nothing else. That is not sustainable, for either of us." He opened his eyes. "You want him," he said. "I want a life that includes more than making sure the gravy is perfect and the playlist loops at the right moment," she answered. "And yes, I may want him to be part of that life." He let out a long breath. "And what about me?" he asked. "You," she said, "will always be my son. That does not change, but maybe it is time for you to start imagining a life that is not built entirely inside this house." He bristled. "So this is about pushing me out," he said. "No," she answered firmly. "This is about letting both of us grow. You staying forever because you think I need you is not the same as choosing your own path." He looked at her, a mixture of anger and hurt and reluctant understand in his eyes. "I did not stay only for you," he said quietly. "I stayed because I was scared to leave." She nodded. "I know," she said. That admission seemed to soften something between them. They sat in silence for a while, the tree lights blinking lazily in the corner. Finally he said, "I do not know how to do this." "Neither do I," she replied. He huffed a tired half-laugh. "Comforting," he said. "Honest," she answered. He rubbed his hands over his face. "I need time," he said, "to get used to this idea, to decide how I feel about him." "Mark," she said. "Santa," he corrected, then shook his head. "Mark." "Fine." She smiled despite herself. Take the time you need, she said. I am not going to force you to accept anything overnight. He nodded slowly. But, he added, please do not lie to me about it. If he is here, I want to know. If you are seeing him, I want to know. I cannot handle another half-secret situation. She felt that like a weight and a relief at once. That is fair, she said. No more secrets. They both knew that complete transparency in emotional matters was more ideal than practical, but the promise mattered. The rest of the day moved in a strange rhythm. They went through some of the usual Christmas Day motions: reheated food, gifts opened more slowly, text messages from relatives answered with neutral smiles. Every now and then their eyes would meet, and the conversation from the morning would flicker between them again. In the quiet moments, Elizabeth thought about Mark, about the way he had looked at her in the kitchen, about the way he had voluntarily stepped away to give them space. In his own small flat across town, Mark sat on his sofa with Princess on his lap, staring at his phone. He did not text, he did not call. He let the silence do its work, as uncomfortable as it was. The night that would not end had rolled into a day that refused to be simple. Yet under the awkwardness and the hurt, something else had begun. Martin had seen that his mother could be more than his anchor. Elizabeth had admitted out loud that she wanted a life beyond the snow globe. Mark had stepped into their story not just as a comforting figure, but as a man who might stay. The freeze around their carefully preserved Christmas was cracking, inch by inch. It was messy, it was uncomfortable. It was, annoyingly, exactly what needed to happen if any of them were going to move forward. As evening fell again, the tree lights still glowed in the corner, but their shine felt different. Less like a protective spell, more like a gentle reminder that light could exist even when things were complicated. The night would end eventually. The story would not. Chapter 9. Broken Ornaments and Other Truths. The days after Christmas always felt slightly unreal in the yellow house. The tree still shone like it had something important to say, but the urgency was gone. The big performance had already happened. What remained was aftermath. This year the feeling was stronger. It was as if everyone had forgotten to put the holiday away and instead left it lying on the floor, half folded, waiting for someone brave enough to deal with it. On the morning of the second day of Christmas, Martin stood in the living room wearing his oldest sweater and the expression of a man trying to make friends with gravity. The floor around the tree was a landscape of discarded paper and open boxes. Gifts had been neatly put away or left in small piles depending on how exciting they were. He picked up an ornament that had slipped from a branch sometime during the night. It was a small glass ball, red with a tiny gold pattern. One side was cracked, a thin line running through it like a frozen river. He turned it in his hand, watching the way the light hit the damage. "Do not tell me that one broke," Elizabeth said behind him. He looked over his shoulder. She stood in the doorway in soft clothes, hair gathered in a loose knot. She looked less like the Queen of Christmas, and more like a woman recovering from hosting a very complicated play. "It is just cracked," he said, "still mostly functioning, like the rest of her." She smiled weakly. "It was already chipped last year," she said. "I am impressed it lasted this long." He held the ornament up, squinting at it. "We could glue it," he suggested. "We could," she replied, "or we could let some things retire gracefully." It was impossible to tell whether she meant the ornament or something else. He placed the ball carefully on the coffee table, next to a mug and a remote control and a folded piece of wrapping paper he had forgotten to throw away. "So," he said, "how are you?" She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "We are really doing this," she said. "Post-Christmas emotional status updates." "You started it," he replied. She considered the question properly. "I am," she said slowly, tired, worried, a bit hopeful, very confused. "How are you?" He nodded as if he were taking notes. "Confused," he said, annoyed, slightly betrayed, also guilty for feeling betrayed, and weirdly relieved in moments that scare me when they show up. "Relieved," she repeated. He glanced at the tree. "It feels like someone finally turned the big light on in this house," he said. "I am not sure I like the color, but at least I can see things more clearly. That is not nothing, she said quietly. They moved through the day together with more care than usual, as if the floor were covered with invisible glass. There were fewer jokes, fewer comments about the playlist, more silence. But it was not the cold silence of people avoiding each other. It was the fragile silence of people who had run out of familiar lines. At one point, early in the afternoon, Martin pulled on his coat. "I'm going for a walk," he said. Again she asked. "I find that walking is cheaper than therapy," he answered. "At least for now." She nodded. "As long as you come back," she said. He paused, hand on the door handle. "I am not leaving, he said. "Not today. You would not survive alone with that oven." She rolled her eyes. "I have lived longer with that oven than you have," she replied. He smiled, then stepped out into the cold. The town in those days between Christmas and New Year had its own mood. People walked a little slower, as if digesting more than food. Shops were opened at half-hearted. Some windows already hinted at sales, promising fresh starts in the form of discounted clothing and fitness gear. Martin drifted through it like a ghost. He ended up at the river, leaning on the railing while watching chunks of ice float by, bumping gently into each other like polite strangers. He thought about leaving, not just the house for a walk, but really leaving, finding a flat, a life, a routine that did not include his mother in every plan. He also thought about staying, clinging harder than ever now that something was changing. Both options made his stomach twist. He pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled aimlessly through messages. A colleague had sent him a photo of their family in matching pajamas. An old friend had wished him happy holidays with a string of cheerful words that felt like they belonged to a different language. His thumb hovered over a contact he barely used, Mark. He had saved the number from the time his mother had handed him her phone and asked him to confirm something with the Santa guy about the schedule. He had not deleted it. He considered sending a message now, something cool and adult like "we should talk," or something aggressively sarcastic like "congratulations on disturbing 70% of my psychological foundation." Instead, he locked the screen and put the phone back in his pocket. Not yet. Back at the house, Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a scrap of paper. She wrote a short list. Take down outer decorations, sort ornaments, call work about schedule. She stared at the words. None of them addressed the story that really needed attention, but at least the list looked like something a functional person would have. She thought about calling Mark. She imagined his voice on the other end, warm, a little careful, ready to take responsibility even when it was not entirely his. She did not call. Not yet. In the evening, when Martin returned, they ended up in the living room again, the tree between them like a friendly but slightly intrusive relative. He sat on the floor, back against the sofa, fidgeting with the cracked ornament again. "Do you remember the first time Santa came?" he asked. She smiled despite herself. "How could I forget?" she said. "You looked at Harry like he had descended from the clouds on a specially scheduled cloud." "I remember the boots," he said. "They squeaked." "We forgot to powder them," she replied. "That was the year I learned about costume maintenance." He laughed softly. "I also remember," he said, "that you cried after he left." She blinked. "I thought you were asleep by then," she said. "I was not," he replied. "I never was. There's no really." She folded her hands in her lap. "I cried because I was scared," she admitted. "That I could not do it, all of it, raise you, pay bills, keep the house from falling apart." He looked up at her. "You never told me that," he said. "Parents rarely lead with their fear," she replied. "It does not test well with children." He snorted. "I just thought you were sad about Dad," he said. "I was," she answered. "That too." They let that name sit between them for a moment like a guest who had not been invited for years. "Do you miss him?" Martin asked. "Sometimes," she said. "The version of him I thought I had. The one who made jokes in the kitchen and danced badly to bad music. Not the one who left." Martin nodded slowly. "I used to think if I behaved well enough he would come back," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. "I know," she said. "That is why I kept Santa going," she continued. "I could not give you your father back. I could at least arrange for when reliable adult in a red coat to show up on schedule." "It worked," he said. "Too well," she answered wryly. They were quiet again. Then he said, "So now what?" She exhaled. "Now," she said, "we admit that Santa has always been a person in a suit, and that people in suits sometimes take off the costume and become part of our lives in other ways." "You want him to be part of our lives?" he asked. She hesitated for only a moment. "I want to see where it goes," she said. "I feel something with him that I have not felt in a very long time, and that does not cancel out what I feel for you." He rubbed a hand over his face. "It is hard not to feel replaced," he said. "You are not a sofa," she replied quietly. "You cannot be replaced." He smiled despite himself. "That is a terrible metaphor," he said. "I am out of good metaphors," she had written. He set the cracked ornament on the floor between them. "When I saw you with him," he said, "I felt for a second like the kid version of me had been thrown out of the room, like there was no place for that part anymore." She shook her head. "There will always be a place for that part," she said, "but we cannot let it drive the whole car forever." He sighed. "And I suppose the adult version of me should not be living in his childhood bedroom until the end of time," he said. "That would be ideal," she replied, the sarcasm gentle. "Do you want me to move out?" he asked. She thought about lying, about saying take your time, stay as long as you need, nothing has to change. Instead, she chose the harder path. "I want you to move into your own life," she said. "That might include moving out, not as punishment, as a step, and I want to help you do that, not throw you into the snow." He nodded slowly. "I have been thinking about it," he said, "even before this. I just always found a reason not to." She smiled faintly. "You are very good at find reasons," she said. He twirled the ornament between his fingers. "What about next Christmas?" he asked. She tilted her head. "What about it?" "Will Santa come?" he said. She considered her answer carefully. "Note like this," she said. He looked up sharply. "No more suits," she continued. "No more knocks at the door like we are casting a play. If Santa appears, it will be in small ways. Someone bringing food when we are exhausted, a friend staying on the phone late. A person who shows up for dinner because he wants to see us, not because we scheduled him through an agency." "So Mark," he said. "So maybe Mark," she answered. He blew out a breath. "I hate that it had to happen this way," he said. "So do I," she replied. "But maybe that was the only way something was going to move." He picked up the cracked ornament again. "We could turn this into something else," he said slowly. "Like what?" she asked. "A reminder," he answered, "that things break, and that we do not have to throw them out." She nodded. "We could hang it near the back of the tree," she suggested, less obvious. "Still they?" "That feels about right," he said. Together they stood and went to the tree. He found a small branch near the trunk. She held the ornament steady while he hooked it on. It hung there, cracked, glinting faintly in the light, not hidden, not highlighted, just present. They stepped back. "It fits," she said. "It does," he agreed. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner of leftovers that tasted better than their emotional context, Martin went to his room and, after a long minute of internal argument, picked up his phone. He opened the message thread with Mark, still empty. He typed, then erased. Typed again, erased again. Finally he sent a single line. "We will talk at some point. Do not vanish." On the other side of town, Mark felt his phone buzz. He read the message once, twice. A slow smile spread across his face. He wrote back, "I will not vanish. Take the time you need." Martin read the reply, put the phone down, and lay back on his bed. His chest still felt tight, but there was also a thin thread of something else woven through the mess. Possibility. In the living room, Elizabeth sat on the sofa, looking at the cracked ornament hanging near the trunk. She felt tired, uncertain, and cautiously hopeful, all at once. Christmas in the yellow house was not fixed. It was not ruined either. It was simply changing shape, like belief itself. Chapter 10. A Different Kind of Christmas. 1 year later, the yellow house looked almost the same from the outside. Snow on the roof, lights in the windows, a wreath on the door that had been updated with fewer glittery elements and more simple greenery. But the inside had changed. The hallway felt less crowded. There were fewer shoes by the door, fewer jackets on the hooks. The familiar sense of one man's belongings scattered through every corner had shifted. Martin did not live there anymore. He stood on the front step now in a dark coat, a paper bag of groceries in one arm and a small wrapped gift in the other. When he knocked, he felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and something like pride. Elizabeth opened the door, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. She wore a soft sweater and jeans, her hair in a neater version of its usual twist. She looked, Martin thought, less like someone carrying a house on her shoulders and more like someone choosing to live in it. "There you are," she said, smiling. "My visiting dignitary." He snorted and stepped inside. The familiar warmth wrapped around him, but it was no longer the air of his primary habitat. It smelled like home and like some place he had graduated from. He took off his boots and hung his coat on an empty hook that waited like a reserved chair in an old cafe. "How is the Empire?" she asked. The Empire, in this case being his very small flat with its mismatched furniture and unreliable radiators. "Still standing," he replied. "I bought a new lamp. I think that officially makes me an adult." She laughed. "Any plant deaths to report?" she asked. "Only one," he said. "The basil did not make it." We held a brief ceremony over pasta. They moved into the living room together. The tree stood in its usual corner, but it was decorated differently this year. Fewer ornaments, more space between them. The cracked red ball hung near the trunk, exactly where they had left it last time, now a deliberate part of the arrangement, he noticed at once. "You kept it," he said. "Of course," she replied. "It is our official symbol of complicated growth." The room itself felt less cluttered. Some old decorations had quietly retired. A couple of new ones had joined the ensemble. On the side table sat a framed photo of Elizabeth and Mark at an outdoor market, bundled in coats, smiling at something off camera. Martin saw it, registered it, and did not pretend he had not. "You two went somewhere," he said. She glanced at the picture. "A trip in autumn," she said. "Just a weekend." We argued about which cheese to buy at a stall for what felt like 3 hours. It was nice. He nodded. "So he is coming tonight," he said. She took a breath. "Yes," she answered. "If that is all right with you." "It is your house," he replied. "It is our family." She said carefully. "That is not quite the same thing." He considered this and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. In truth, the conversation about Mark had not ended with that first raw post-Christmas day. There had been more talks, some tense, some quieter. Mark had come by a few times for coffee, always announced, always respectful. Martin had watched him, tested him, pushed him a little. Mark had responded with a calm that felt earned, not performative. Over time the sharp edges softened, not into a simple friendship, not yet, but into a workable truce. Martin did not call him Santa anymore, not even in his head. "He calls me the man behind the beard," Mark had told Elizabeth once, amused. "I will accept that as progress." Now as the afternoon light slanted across the living room, Elizabeth adjusted a cushion on the sofa that did not need adjusting. "Are you sure you are all right?" she asked. "With him joining us on Christmas Eve," he sighed. "I am not sure of many things," he said, "but I know that pretending he does not exist would be stupid. And I know you are happier with him around. That matters." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes bright. "Thank you," she said. "Do not get emotional," he replied quickly. "The tree might short-circuit." She laughed and wiped at the corner of her eye anyway. In the kitchen they fell into an updated version of their old cooking dance. Martin chopped, Elizabeth stirred. The oven behaved to a reasonable degree. "You are less nervous than last year," she observed. "That is because I now know you are capable of inviting mythical figures into your bedroom," he said. "Everything else seems mild in comparison." She gave him a mock glare. "For the record," she said, "there has been significantly less myth and significantly more mundane reality in the past year. Bills, laundry, arguments about whether we really need 3 kinds of mustard. Domestic bliss, he said. Domestic something, she replied. As the sky darkened, the small town outside repeated its usual rituals. People in coats carrying wrapped dishes across the street, children in two big hats trailing behind, lights glittering in windows like polite small galaxies. The doorbell rang, not the carefully measured Santa knock, just an ordinary ring. Martin and Elizabeth glanced at each other. "I will get it," he said. He walked to the hallway with steady steps. His heart did not race the way it had a year before. It thudded a little more heavily than usual, but that seemed reasonable. He opened the door. Mark stood there in a dark coat, beard neatly trimmed, a modest bouquet of winter flowers in one hand and a box under the other arm. No red suit, no sack, no bells. Martin eyed the flowers. "Bringing offerings to the house spirits," he said. "Something like that," Mark answered, smiling. "May I come in?" Martin stepped aside. "We decided to allow humans this year," he said. Mark laughed and stepped into the hallway, stamping a bit of snow from his boots. Elizabeth appeared from the living room, her face lighting up in a way that did not require Christmas lights. "You found us," she said. "Hard to miss," he replied. "Brightest house on the street, as usual." Martin closed the door behind him, then leaned against the wall for a second, watching the two of them. It still felt strange seeing his mother like that, softer, less contained. But strange was no longer the same as wrong. They moved to the living room. Mark handed Elizabeth the flowers and set the box on the table. "What is that?" Martin asked. "A board game," Mark said. "I thought we could try something new after dinner, or at least argue over the rules." "Ah," Martin replied. "True family bonding." Dinner went surprisingly smoothly. Conversation flowed around work stories, small-town gossip, and the universal topic of whether winter had always been this dark, or if time had invented new shadows just for fun. At one point, Mark told a story about a Santa gig he had decided not to take this year. A loud corporate event where the organizers had wanted him to deliver motivational lines about productivity while dressed in full costume. "I said no," he said, sipping his wine. "Even I have standards," Martin snorted. "Santa does not do corporate coaching," he said. "Good to know." Mark shrugged. "I will share that with the agency," he said. "They can put it in my profile." After dinner they cleared the table together. There was an easy rhythm forming among the three of them. Martin washed, Mark dried. Elizabeth moved dishes back to cupboards with the practiced efficiency of someone who had mapped the kitchen into her bones. When the last plate was put away, Martin wiped his hands and leaned against the counter. He said, "I need to ask." Both of them turned toward him, suddenly alert. "No," he said quickly, "not that. I mean about Santa." Mark relaxed a little. "All right," he said. "Ask." "Are you," Martin began, then corrected himself. "Were you Santa for other families this year?" Mark nodded. "A few," he said. "Less than before. I am slowly retiring the suit." "Why?" Martin asked. Mark considered his answer. "Because I do not want to spend the rest of my life being the symbol of something I am still trying to understand myself," he said. "And because I would rather show up in my own coat for the people who matter to me." Elizabeth looked at him with quiet affection. Martin absorbed that. "So no unexpected Santa appearances tonight," he said. "I left the suit in the wardrobe," Mark answered, "both literally and metaphorically." "Good," Martin said. "I do not think the ceiling could handle the reindeer." They moved to the living room and opened a few gifts. Nothing extravagant, a warm scarf, a book, a set of mugs that almost matched. From Mark, Martin unwrapped a small high-quality toolkit for electronics. "So you stop using butter knives as screwdrivers," Mark said. Martin held it up, examining the pieces. "This is actually very useful," he said. "I know," Mark replied. "I asked your colleague." Martin felt a surprising warmth at that. From Martin, Mark received a thick, slightly ridiculous pair of socks with reindeer on them. "In case you relapse into seasonal work," Martin said. "I will wear them as a warning," Mark answered. The evening settled into a comfortable hum. They tried the board game. The rules were predictably confusing, leading to exactly the sort of arguments that make families feel more real than any posed photograph. "You cannot move there," Martin said. "It says so in the rules." "It says nothing of the sort," Mark replied. It says you may not move 2 spaces diagonally while carrying a token. I am not carrying a token. Elizabeth shook her head. I did not spend years mastering holiday logistics so I could referee this, she said, even as she leaned over to read the tiny text. Eventually they abandoned the game and returned to simply talking. At that point when Mark went to make more tea, Martin and Elizabeth found themselves alone on the sofa. This is different, Martin said. Yes, she replied. But not bad different, he added. Her smile was small but genuine. You seem, she said carefully, more settled than last year. He nodded. The flat helps, he said. The rent does not, but the space does. It is strange, having a place where no one knows my mug preferences unless I tell them. She laughed. That is adulthood, she said. Endless possibilities and the wrong spoons. He looked at her. Are you happy, he asked. She thought about it. Really thought. I am learning how to be, she said. It is not as simple as I expected, but yes, more than I have been in a long time. He nodded. Good, he said. She studied his face. And you? She asked. He tilted his head, considering. I am not magically fixed, he said. I still feel behind sometimes, like everyone else got an instruction manual I missed. But I am starting to enjoy deciding small things for myself. What time to go to bed, whether to cook or order cheap food. He paused, then added, and I do not need Santa to walk through the door to feel like someone might show up when I need them. She reached over and squeezed his hand. You can still put out cookies if you want, she said. He smiled. Maybe just one, he replied, as a tribute to our cracked ornament. Later, as night settled properly, Mark stood by the window looking out at the snow. Martin joined him, hands in his pockets. So Martin said without drama, I am glad you did not vanish. Mark glanced at him. I gave my word, he said. Words are cheap, Martin replied. Showing up is not. Mark nodded. You showed up too, he said. Moving out, letting me come back. Both require more courage than anything I do in a red suit. Martin shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment but not rejecting it. I still think the way you entered this family was very weird, he said. Mark laughed. I agree, he said. But, Martin went on, you have been less of a disaster than I expected. High praise, Mark said. I will try to live up to it. They stood there in companionable silence for a moment, watching a neighbour struggle with a trash bag that had clearly been overloaded with festive optimism. Do you ever miss it? Martin asked. The suit, Mark said. Yes. Sometimes, Mark answered. Then I remember that I can still do most of what Santa is supposed to do without the outfit. Show up, listen, bring small, thoughtful gifts, be there when it is dark. That sounds like a lot of work, Martin said. It is, Mark replied. It is also worth it. Martin nodded. Inside the room, the tree lights flickered gently. The cracked ornament near the trunk caught a brief glint, then settled back into quiet. Elizabeth watched the two men by the window, her son, the man she loved. They were both still uncertain, both still figuring out how to stand side by side without tripping over old stories. But they were there, under the same roof, on the same night, without any costumes to hide behind. Later, when Martin put on his coat to walk back to his flat, she stood with him in the hallway. You can stay over, she said. He shook his head. I like the idea of walking home, he said, seeing our house from the outside for once. Our house, she repeated quietly. He smiled. It will probably always be that in my head, he said. Even when you turn my room into a yoga studio. I do not own enough patience for that, she answered. He bent and hugged her, holding on a little longer than necessary. Merry Christmas, he said. Merry Christmas, she replied, her voice thick. He straightened, then glanced toward the kitchen where Mark was rinsing cups. Merry Christmas, man behind the beard, he called. Mark appeared in the doorway, drying his hands. Merry Christmas, man who survived the beard, he said. Then Martin stepped out into the quiet street. Snow fell in small, unhurried flakes, landing on his coat and head. He walked slowly, breathing in the cold, listening to the muffled world. He passed other houses with their lights and trees. He imagined the stories inside them. Easy ones, hard ones, messy ones. No costumes, just people trying their best with the pieces they had. At the corner he paused and looked back. The yellow house glowed softly against the dark. In the window he could see the outline of the tree and, faintly, the movement of his mother and Mark as they cleared the last dishes of the night. He smiled. He did not whisper a thank you to Santa this time. That chapter was closed. Instead he offered a quiet thanks to everyone who had shown up when he needed them. His mother holding the line through years of uncertainty. The neighbor with the squeaky boots long ago. The many stand-in Santettes. The man who had entered in a red suit and stayed in a sweater. And, with a small amount of self-conscious pride to himself, for finally stepping out of the snow globe, he turned toward his small flat, where a modest tree waited by the window and a single cookie sat on a plate on the table. Not for Santa. For the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. Christmas, he realized, was no longer about a figure in red visiting a yellow house. It was about messy people, cracked ornaments, and the stubborn light that kept find its way through anyway.